The Human from a Dungeon, by its director. Chapter 111. Nash Alter Adventurer Level 11, Orc Nulavan. The rage in my chest turned into something cold as I watched Agurno leave. It felt like a kind of generalized disgust, but it was hard to put my finger on why I was feeling it. Could it have been the realization that the abandonment that Nima had gone through was cyclical? Or maybe it was how casually and unapologetically Agurno had admitted to his faults, with no intention of changing them. "Hey, are you guys okay?" a small voice asked from my left. I turned to see the imp that had helped Nick earlier, though I couldn't recall his name. His apparent concern for our well-being did nothing to improve my mood. Imps were well known for using trauma inflicted by others as a manipulation tactic. "Yeah, we're all right," Nick answered. "Thanks for checking, Eugene." Nick's reply annoyed me in several ways. First, he assumed that he knew how I was without checking with me first. Second, he shared that presumption with someone that I didn't trust. Third, he remembered the goddamned imp's name when I had forgotten it. I gave him a glance that attempted to properly convey the amount of annoyance that I was feeling, but my eyes could only roll so far. "No problem," Eugene said, unaware of my annoyance. "I know how much of an asshole Agurno can be, so I thought I'd check." "You know him?" "I haven't exactly talked to him, but everyone here knows of him. Even new guards know better than to try to stop him." "How long has this been going on?" "Longer than I've lived here," Eugene laughed. "But he only shows up once every few months. Word has it that he's been doing jobs for the courts." "Yeah, he interrupted our meeting to tell them that he's finished one," Nick said, then looked around. "Where did Kint go?" "He was next in line, so he cancelled his appointment. He was going to beg a favor, and nobody wants to do that after the court has met with Agurno." I looked around and noticed that quite a few people had left. The only ones who remained were those carrying satchels and those who looked as if they hadn't eaten in a while. Deliveries and desperation. "So did you get what you needed from the court?" Eugene asked. "I hope they didn't extort too large of a favor from you." "Yeah, we learned what we needed to," Nick said. "And actually, Agurno helped us with that." "He did so as a means of condescension," Yulk interjected, "to demonstrate that he is superior to us. Nash must have hurt his feelings by calling him out for being an absentee father." "And punching him a few times," I chuckled. "Oh, let's not tell Nima about that. The only time you should keep secrets is if you don't mind if they bite you, brother." "Don't worry, I'll tell her about it. I just don't want the conversation to be randomly sprung upon me when I'm not prepared for it." "You actually punched Agurno?" Eugene asked in shock. "That mountain of muscle with the patience of an Ugran trap?" "Of course I did. He abandoned his daughter, my fiancée, and I'm not afraid of that overgrown foo." "Eugene Farron, you are to appear before the court," the extra-tall Fey guard interrupted. "Approach the gate." "Ah, looks like I'm next," Eugene said. "Well, it was nice seeing you again. I hope things work out." "You too," Nick smiled. The imp grabbed a small satchel and trotted off toward the gate. He and Nick exchanged a wave as the gate opened, and we turned to leave as it closed behind him. It was obvious that Nick didn't mind throwing caution to the wind to be friends with Eugene. Thankfully, we were probably going to be headed elsewhere soon. Otherwise, Nick would probably learn the hard way why imps have the reputation that they do. He was demonstrating the exact type of naivety that they target. Imps don't really belong to any one nation. They wander from place to place, setting camp between villages and towns. Then they send their people to go get food, drink, and other supplies. This is usually accomplished via trickery, theft, and even murder. Once they have what they need and their unwilling neighbors start talking about getting justice, they leave. They usually go just far enough away to avoid local law enforcers. If their crimes are particularly heinous, though, they'll flee the nation entirely and won't return for a generation or two. The most heinous of crimes are the ones that happen to the poor young women who think they've fallen in love. Orcs can't have children with other species because our biology is dangerously incompatible. Imps have a similar problem, but instead of sharp and crushing bones, they have a twisted seed. Whenever that seed takes root, the mother involved dies one of the most horrific deaths imaginable. It's the type of injury that even healing magic can't fix. So where are we going now? Nick asked as we began to walk back to the city. We will have to do research to find areas where these cracks might appear. Yulk replied, then I suppose we must find a way to determine which cracks lead where and how to open them wide enough to slip through. So back to Kirkener. The mention of the capital city brought about unexpected thoughts of Nima. I suddenly wanted to know what she was up to, if she was missing me or not, and how she would react to my run-in with her father. There was a certain uncharacteristic anxiety surrounding these thoughts as well, as if I had to see her or I never would again. I don't know, Yulk said, deep in thought. Perhaps we should ask Mother for her input. She was an adventurer for several years before we were born. Yulk and I shared a glance, and we stopped in the middle of the great Climata forest. That single glance told me all I needed to know about his desire to return home. It was just like mine. Nick looked back and forth between us. I also think we should return to Nuliva, Nick sighed. Can't help thinking about it, and Ten says my adrenaline levels are spiking. I'm guessing you two feel the same way. Yeah, I said. I am also receiving a not-so-subtle nudge in that direction, Larry added. The higher ones may as well write us a letter. Well, that settles it, Yulk said. The higher ones want us in Nuleva for the next part of our journey. Only a fool would ignore such an obvious hint. I would still like to pass through Talokam if we are able. Checking on the kobolds shouldn't be an issue. That shouldn't be a problem. We should be able to get a ride straight to Nuleva from there. We began to walk again, but fell into an uncomfortable silence. The sudden press of feelings that weren't quite my own had shaken me a little, and I could tell that Larry and Yulk felt the same way. Nick's eyes were locked to the ground, as if he were ashamed of what had just happened. I felt as if I should tell him that it wasn't his fault, but the words rang hollow in my head. It wasn't his fault, but if it weren't for him, it wouldn't have happened. It would be disingenuous to claim otherwise. Then I wondered if that thought was my own, or if it had been forced into my head by the higher ones. Hey, you lot, a rumbling voice came from behind us as we entered a clearing. We stopped and turned to look at the trees from which the voice had come from. 3 of them had slightly scowling faces made of bark. The one in the center was huge. I took a cautious step back, suddenly recalled our last encounter with them and the roots that had sprang from the ground. Hello, Nick said. Yeah, hi, the central tree said. Listen, you helped one of us earlier, you remember? The thing with the spell and the reptian. Yeah, of course. Good. Well, it asked too much of you, but you went and helped it anyway. An arm would have been enough to balance things. We can't owe you. Especially not you, human. We're going to balance things. It's all right. Wait, you know what I am? Of course we do, the tree on the left said impatiently, then looked thoughtful. Should we tell him? No, the tree on the right said. That's worth much more than a reptian corpse sans one arm. Stick to the plan. Shut up, the center tree grumbled, its branches shaking angrily. I'm speaking. Sorry, boss, the other 2 said in unison. Right, listen, human. You remember your home, yeah? Yeah, Good. Are you familiar with symbols of power, like religious iconography and whatnot? You mean like the cross? Yes. The Christian cross, the Star of David, the Nazar Bonkuk, the Hamsa, the pentagram, things like that. You know what these are? What they do? Yeah, I think so. Good. Remember this, and remember it well. These symbols are known to your kind for a reason. That reason is because they work. The inverse of those symbols perform the opposite function as well. Do you understand? No, Nick stammered. What do you mean they work? The symbols protect from evil. True evil. Primordial evil. Not the evil of other fleshy ones, mind you. The kind of evil that your kind has feared since before you controlled fire. Flipping the symbols upside down will also negate the protection of other symbols. An inverted cross will negate a Hamza and vice versa. Also, the intention of the symbol matters a lot during its construction. One of your lowercase t's isn't going to do anything. Get it? Yeah. How do you know the dash? It is knowledge that will be useful to you, the tree interrupted. This makes us even. Now hurry along and get out of our forest. Before Nick could stammer another reply, the faces on the trees disappeared. We stood stunned for a few moments. Our surprise quickly wore off once we noticed how many angry-looking birds were watching us. "I think we should go," I said. "I concur," Larry added. We turned and began to walk a little bit faster than we had before. It occurred to me that it was kind of funny to see a lich, which would otherwise be considered an ancient horror, flee right alongside us. Regardless of my amusement, though, I kept up the pace, and before long we were back at the wall. The archers on top of it watched us warily, but the gate swung open for us without any issues. "Should we stay the night?" I asked. A lurch in my stomach seemed to answer the question for me. "We should leave immediately," Yulk said, panting a little. "We have traveled alongside Nick for quite some time now, and never before have I experienced such direct intervention from his friends." "They're no friends of mine," Nick replied grumpily. "Yes, well, regardless, I believe that this is a matter of urgency, and I'm not entirely certain that the belief is my own." "It isn't," Larry added. "One of the side effects to my condition is ultra-sensitivity to beings not of this plane. I'm assuming you're getting funny feelings, odd pushes towards certain thoughts, and things of that nature. I'm practically hearing voices telling me to accompany you." "So, either something really good or really bad is about to happen?" I asked. "Knowing our luck," Nick said, trailing off. We moved with purpose, stopping by the Marfix Inn to check out and retrieve the items we had left there. From the inn, we traveled back through the city, exiting the main gate. The guards held us up for a few moments, confirming our identities and that we weren't wanted for any crimes within the city, but let us through without further issue. Our next stop was the stable. We waited outside while Yulk entered the booking building to make the arrangements. He came back out with a familiar-looking dwarf. "Surprised to see you lot again so soon," Hack chuckled. "I expected at least a couple of days to rest and relax." "Apologies," Larry dipped his bony head. "It would seem that we are needed elsewhere, and we're in quite a rush. I know Mr. Yulk already paid the extra cost for the rush. I'll bring the cart around." The dwarf hurried off. We waited patiently until a pair of extra-large horses came out of the stable, pulling a cart behind them. They seemed a tad annoyed when Hack called them to a halt, as if they were looking forward to hauling the cart around. I gave an appreciative whistle as I climbed aboard. "Good-looking animals you've got there," I said. "Absolutely, we're lucky to have them," Hack laughed. "Bonesley, the one on the left, used to be a draft animal. Her owner went bankrupt, and we nabbed her for a steal because she's got quite a few years on her, though you wouldn't know it by the way she hauls the carts. The guy on the right is Yigthar. Similar story as Bonesley, got him from the same owner, but the difference is that he began life as a racer. Had a bit too much muscle on him, though, so he started pulling carts alongside Bonesley. They love the work, and they're used to pulling much heavier loads, so they tend to go really fast." "I'm glad that I paid extra," Yulk laughed. "Me too, sir. Driving this pair of harnesses is a real treat. They'll get us where you're going in no time. All aboard." We gave our affirmatives as we took our seats. "All right, next stop is Talakam. We'll be arriving in the morning, so feel free to grab a nap." I immediately shot Yulk an angry look. Cart drivers absolutely hate traveling at night, so he must have paid a ton of coin to arrange this. My brother grinned and shrugged as the cart began to move. I muttered some choice swears as I settled in for the ride. Chapter 112. Lilord Simith. Adventurer level NA, Kobold, unknown. My tail wagged happily as I looked at my new bed. It was a cushion with wool blankets on top of it. We had made lots of money from all the trades we'd been doing, and Gali had said that it would be good for more Al if we got better beds. I didn't know who Al was, but Marka had insisted that it was a great idea. I wasn't really sure how a sack of soft stuff could be better than a pile of smell-good leaves, but I couldn't really think of a reason not to order the cushions. We had the coins, and Marka pointed out that it would help the old kobolds with their joint pain. Plus, the wool blankets were included with the purchase, so they didn't even cost us extra coins. Still, I felt like sleeping on something other than smell-good leaves was kind of wrong. My doubts disappeared the moment I laid down, though. The fabric of the blanket was rough enough to scratch my scales just right. The squish felt like laying in a lard pile, without the greasiness. It also smelled like flowers instead of lard, which was a little disappointing. It would be up for arguments which smell would be better, I guess. I pulled the blanket over me and laid my head back, prepared for sleep. "Le Lord Simith, you have done really well," the Lord said to me. "Thanks, my lord. I tried really hard." I beamed, hopping up and down in excitement. "It was really easy, too." "That's just because you is a really smart kobold." The Lord's bony fingers reached down and scratched me in my favorite spot, right behind my ear holes. My tail moved back and forth happily. All the other kobolds watched, impressed that I had done so well. Tomasz and Samiel gave me some proud smiles. "You're so smart and big and strong and awesome," Yamana said. "I misted you a lot. Would you fertilize my eggs?" "But what about me?" Marka asked. "I want fertilized eggs too." "Le Lord Simith is potent enough for both of us," Yamana winked. "I would be honored," I said, "but I don't has enough time to make little ones. I need to help the Lord." "Don't worry, my dear Simith," the Lord said. "I am returned now. You don't have to be Lay Lord anymore. You can do whatever you want now, and nobody will bother you with decisions no more." "Really?" I asked, excited about being able to play again. "Really? I'm back for good now, and I won't leave no more. Now go fertilize those eggs." "We want our eggs fertilized too," more kobolds shouted. "It's gonna be a busy day," I laughed. Everyone laughed with me, and it felt really good. Everything was better than I ever could have hoped. I was so happy. Yamana and Marka grabbed my hands and began leading me away. "Wake up, Lee Lord," Yamana said with a suspiciously deep voice. "What?" I asked, confused. "Sorry, Lee Lord, but you need to get up." My eyes snapped open and I looked around the room for Yamana. Instead, I saw Gar staring down at me. My gigantic guard was panting a little, as if he had run a long way. Then I remembered that Yamana was dead, and I didn't like Marka that way. I had been dreaming. "What's going on?" I asked, wiping the drool and stuff off my face. "The Lord is back." "What?" I froze. "The Lord is back. He's at the store in the city." I leapt off of the cushion and almost tripped over the blanket. I hissed at it as I pulled it off of my legs. Without saying another word, I started to run as fast as I could through the dungeon. Gar kept pace with me, which was really easy for a Bakabold to do. Long legs means faster runners, but even orcs can't run as fast as Bakabolds can. We ran to the tunnel, through the tunnel, and into the mansion that we turned into a store. The magical lights that we got from the elves kind of hurt my eyes, but I still looked around frantically. Then I saw him. The Lord, standing in our store, looking at our goods. I wanted to call to him, but my throat wouldn't open. Instead, I ran over and knelt, skidding on the polished wooden floor a little bit. "Ah, Simith," he said with a happy tone, "I see you have done quite well in my absence. Far better than I had expected, certainly." "Thank you, my lord," I said. "Samuel was telling me that a secret tunnel to this manor was discovered in the dungeon." "Yes, my lord. Some elf adventurers came, and we welcomed them like you told us to. One of them accidentally helped Hinthry discover the entrance. You said you wanted a trade relations with the town, so I decided that opening a store would be better than waiting for the caravan. And the municipal government is fine with this." "I don't know, my lord, but the mayor helped us with the forms and buying the manor. We have enough coin to pay off the mortgage, but Tomasz says that we should save some coin to buy more goods to sell from the elves when their caravan comes back." "You're trading with elves as well? From where?" "Yes, my lord. The elf adventurers introduced us to some merchants from their kingdom to the south of the dungeon. We buy stuffs from them, then sell the stuffs to the town in the store. Oh, and we lets merchants open stalls in here too. They pay us rent." "Is it just me, or has his speech improved?" somebody else asked. I looked up and saw a familiar pinkish face. The weird shitty guy who helped kill the sucker had a curious look on his face. Then I noticed that the orcs he was with for the fight were also with him. The only people missing from when we saved the Lord were the wasted westerns. "I've been taking lessons," I exclaimed. "More like the people in the city kept correcting you," Samiel said quietly. I glared at my impudent underling. "I listened to the corrections and have also been asking about the big words," I argued. "Regardless of how the learning is being done, progress has indeed been made," the Lord said. "I chose my proxy well." "Really?" I asked in amazement. "Yes, I'm proud of you, Simith." I felt a wetness on my face and quickly tried to wipe away the tears that had started coming from my eyes. My mama used to tell me that big kobolds don't cry, but I couldn't help it. My good dream was coming true, except Yamana was still dead, and there wasn't any talk about egg fertilizing. Not that there was really anyone that I wanted to fertilize with, except for Yamana. I almost laughed through my tears once I realized the thoughts I was thinking. The Lord told me, in his infinite wisdom, that I was worthy of something like pride, and here I was thinking about fertilizing eggs. The Lord noticed my tears and nodded softly. Everyone else went quiet. It was hard to tell if they were concerned or they understood. Samial's chin was jumping up and down like he was trying not to cry too. Maybe my mama was wrong and meant to say Bakabolds don't cry. "Are you okay?" the Humi guy asked. Yeah, I managed to say. "I'm just so glad. I worked it really, really hard. We all did. And it was scary. I didn't know what to do. Tamash didn't really know either. And I was so scared that we was doing the wrong stuff or stuff wrong. The Lord is so kind, and he wants what's best for us, but he left it to me to decide what was best for us, and I was so worried that I wasn't ready for it. Was he being too kind in choosing me, or was choosing me by default because I was the only one who survived the sucker attack? I didn't know, and I didn't like questioning the Lord. And I really, really missed the Lord too. I missed you too, Simith. All of you. Also you mean default. The Lord laughed and bopped my nose with his bony finger. "Oh yeah, default not defoot," I chuckled. "It's just, this is like the best dream come true right after I awaked. I'm not supposed to be a leader, but I did a good job, and now the Lord is back so I can go back to being a normal kobold." The Lord's jaw opened slightly, which was an expression I had only seen when the younglings would ask him questions about fertilizing eggs. He would usually say something about how certain knowledge should come at a certain point in maturities, and that they should ask their parents if they're ready for it or not. If they pestered him about it, he would get impatient and threaten to tell their mamas on them. But I didn't ask him about how to fertilize eggs. I already know how to do that, it's easy. So why would he be making that face? "Well, Samith," the Lord scratched his neck bones, "I'm not entirely back." "You're not back?" I asked, confused. "No, but you're standing here." "Correct. So you back. But you're not back." "Yes. I'm confused, my lord." "I know," the Lord sighed. "My time away from the dungeon is not quite finished, but I wanted to visit and see how things were going." Visit?" I asked, tilting my head in confusion. "Yes. I wanted to check in, and depending on how things were going, either reassure you or correct you. I have other matters to attend to that require my presence elsewhere." "Oh, so I'm not done being Lord?" "No, not quite yet. Soon. Perhaps," the Lord rubbed his jawbone, "though there's a possibility." "Maybe is plenty, my lord," I bowed. "I can be a strong kobold, as long as I know I don't have to be that forever." The Lord scratched my head and laughed again. "I have seen many good leaders and many bad leaders, Simith," he said. "Whether they be kobolds, elves, dwarves, gnomes, or orcs, all good leaders share similar qualities. Good leaders take the time to give things a second thought when they can afford to. They hold themselves accountable, because there's no one who doubts them more than they doubt themselves. But above all, they don't allow those doubts to stop them from doing what needs to be done. I firmly believe that were I to ask any of the kobolds or bakabolds that are under your guidance, they would all agree that's an apt description of you." A murmur of agreement came from the kobolds and bakabolds who were watching. I looked at them in disbelief and saw Samiel nodding really hard. Then the Lord said something that shocked me to my core. "In many ways, you're a better leader than I am." This led to some confusing stuff in my head. The words almost felt good to hear, but I was angry at the Lord for being criticality of the Lord. But being angry at the Lord wasn't right to do. So I decided to be angry at the words instead. "Absorbingly not, my lord," I argued. "I think you mean absolutely dash." "Doesn't matter, sire," I hissed angrily. "You has been the Lord since way before I was born. You are the only leader I has ever had. You are super strong, you are super smart, but you still look after us. Even kobolds that are new know that you are gooder than their chiefs ever could be, because you are more than we could ever hope to be, but you hope for us. You saw my great-great-great-great-grandparents struggling and not only helped them, but you helped all their kids too. How could you not be best leader ever? The other kobolds cheered at my words, demonstrating their loyalties for the Lord. I nodded approvingly at them. All of those things you said about me applies to you too, my lord. No, the Lord laughed. I definitely don't doubt myself nearly enough. You're doing it right now, my lord, I interrupted. Everything you said makes me a good leader is stuffs that I learned from watching you when I was a hatchling. Whenever I has to leads, I just copy how I've seen you do it. He's very good copier, Gar agreed with a chuckle. Simith does well as your proxy, my lord, but you are our lord because you're wise enough to have seen his potential, Samial added. Even if he were to remain our leader for the rest of his days, he could never reach the level of experience in the role that you have. We all respect the Lord, and will live and die at his word, but only because that word is reflective of those that would come from you, our true Lord. The orcs that were friends of the Lord looked at him with uncomfortable expressions. The pink guy just kind of nodded silently. But the Lord stared at us, seemingly at a loss for words. You are the Lord, I said. You will always be our Lord, even when you don't want to. Everything we have, everything we are, it's all thanks to you. I will be the Lord for you. We will make friends with all the Shire townfolk for you. We will protect our home for you. We will better ourselves for you. I could feel an excitement in the air, building which each world. I rose to my feet. Proudly, I looked our Lord in the face and took a deep breath. Everything we do, I shouted, raising my fist. We do it for the Lord, the others shouted back. The Lord looked around at each of us. The Humy and bigger orc looked a little nervous, but the bald orc chuckled a little. He took a step closer to the Lord. Looks like you've accidentally made a cult, he said. A kobold cult. Not cult, I shook my head. The Lord not Slathris. The Lord cares, Slathris doesn't. Slathris? The being that kobolds worship as their creator, the Lord said absent-mindedly. Slathris maked us as a prank on the weirdos, I explained. Mades it so we eated them. Then they fought us, trying to kill us all. Before they could, some mages rescued us. Then mages make backabolds and killed each other. Now Slathris ignores us, but there are some slobberheads who think that if they cry loud enough, Slathris will come back and make life betterer. Their minds are mush, Gar added. Slathris is a cruel god thing. Definitely not something you want paying attention to you. Ah, are we talking about the cult of Slathris? Tomash asked as he entered the room. Oh, many respectful greetings, my lord. Apologies for my delay and lack of decorum, but these knees grow sour with age. Hello, Tomash, the lord nodded. Don't worry about prostration. Your presence is enough. Thank you, my lord. Now what's this about the cult of Slathris? We's telling the orc about how mean Slathris is, I explained. Ah, Tomash nodded slowly. With respect, Lord, mean is not nearly a harsh enough word. Slathris is the epitome of cruelty. I suspect that being a god is boring, and if that's the case, Slathris must find amusement in suffering. Legend has it that the first batch of kobolds he created could only eat wilder. Naturally, they starved to death. Oh, so that's who you meant by weirdos, Yulk chuckled at me. So I take it the next batch could eat regular meat? Yes, but only living flesh, and our ancestors desperately craved the living flesh of the fair folk. Tomash shook his head in disgust. Most wilder automatically regenerate their flesh so long as you don't use iron to carve them, you see. It led to much suffering and a lasting grudge between our peoples. Do you still need to eat living flesh? The Humy asked. No, powerful mages began fighting each other and eventually sought help from the Wilder. The Wilder asked them to be rid of us in exchange for favors. Some of the mages saw our value as foot soldiers and captured us instead of eradicating us. Several generations of experimentation later, and we can eat meat just as you can. And my kind exists, Gar said. I see. Do you know anything about these experiments? Baldy asked. No. Tomash chuckled darkly. Why? Looking to repeat them? Yulk Alta is far more honorable than that, the Lord said. If one such as he were to wish to experiment, it would be for your benefit. Yes, my lord, my apologies. It was in jest, and I meant no offense. Good, the Lord glanced at Yulk, who smiled. Now, we're on a pretty tight schedule, so I would appreciate being brought up to speed on what's been happening around here. A tour wouldn't go amiss either. Yes, yes, I said, my tail moving back and forth with excitement. I shows you all the stuffs we has, my lord. Tomash and I took the lord and his friends around the store, showing him our stuff and telling him how we got it. He was a little shocked about how much stuff the elves were willing to sell us and warned us to use caution when doing international trades. Tomash pointed out that we had been surprised by the ban on our mushrooms, and so we had employees that double-checked with city authorities when we weren't sure if something was legal to buy or sell. I beamed when Tomash noted that it had been my idea. We continued our tour, showing the lord our vendor shops. We explained that we let merchants rent the rooms as well as put up a sign. This kept them off the streets, gave them a safe place to store their goods, and brought more people to our store. It had been the mayor's idea, who said it might be a good way to clear up some of the walkways. Tomash explained that we also allowed the merchants to live in their rooms if they paid extra, but hardly anyone had taken us up on that. Our tour carefully avoided the ones who did, though, because we didn't want to wake them up. Then we got to the good part. One of the bestest things about the manor was a feature that had survived all the bad weather and rot that had taken hold when nobody lived there. Right next to the tunnel that led to the dungeon was a tunnel that led into a giant metal room with a very heavy door. The mayor had given us the key once the mortgage was approved, and even though there wasn't anything cool in it, we figured that it was a good place to store coins. My heart raced as I watched the lord's jaw drop. Stacks of coins as tall as baccabolds lined the back walls. Paintings, jewelry, statues, ancient tomes, and various other valuables were neatly sorted on the sides. The orcs and the Humi were also impressed, but I cared a lot less about their thoughts. The lord congratulated us on our success, and it made me really, really happy. Then we had nothing left to show him, and he had to go. It was surprising how quickly the happy turned to sad, but I decided that I would cherish the good stuff instead of dwelling on the sad stuff. We knelt before our lord as he bid us his farewells. Then the lord and his companions left us with the promise that he would return one day. We all hoped that day would be soon. Chapter 113. Thalamus the Immolator, Adventurer Level, NA, Demon, Unknowable. Does this even count as raising a village? Karain Yith asked with amusement in his voice. I silently agreed with the Master Vampire's assessment. One expects a certain level of structural devastation to be involved in destroying a village. However, with the exception of its populace, this village was completely intact. From a distance, it even looked as if it was undergoing a normal, lively day. It wasn't until one got closer that one would realize that the villagers were being dragged around by demons. Notably, it was only demons doing the dragging. The vampires were not participating, and they had made it clear that they would not participate until it was time to assault the Night Kingdom. Lazy bastards. The attack was a success. I must report to Lord Hergarus, I said, nodding to the vampire. He nodded back and I turned to leave. Attacking a village and leaving it standing didn't sit right with me. No fires, no battle cries, none of the wailing of the wounded and dying. What was even the point? Hergarus had ordered me to find a way to take the village without any fuss. Poisoning the water supply had been a simple task. From there, we simply had to wait a day until everyone in the village was weakened enough for us to simply stroll in and capture them all. It felt cheap. The Decimator's command tent was also cheap. It was made of simple cloth and only about 3 times the size of a standard tent. Were I not in the know, I would think that it belonged to a moderately successful merchant who traveled with their family. Never would I have been able to guess that it actually belonged to the leader of a demon legion. I announced my presence and entered the tent to find Hergarus the Decimator sitting at what might possibly be the smallest war table that had ever existed. The tent, his seat, the table, and even our attack on the village reeked of humility. Disgusting. What is it? Hergarus asked. The village has fallen, Lord Decimator, I said with a sarcastically deep bow, a grand victory indeed. It did not sit well with me that Hergarus had been allowed to keep his rank. His strength and regenerative abilities were a boon to battle, certainly, but the gaps in his memory were quite concerning, especially for someone in a leadership position. Marquis Niberius had laughed when he made the decision, and laughed harder when he assigned me to be Hergarus's second-in-command. It was a promotion in both name and privilege, but I knew where the blame would lay if we failed our mission. Unfortunately, I had been very clear about my desire to be promoted, so I had no way to decline the honor without clarifying my reasons, and the memory of having to regrow my leg had still been quite fresh in my mind. "Casualties?" Hergarus asked. "None, sir," I replied, straightening my posture. "There were no villagers in fighting shape, thanks to the poison that I slipped into their water at your order. Our forces were able to walk into each hut and chain their occupants with nary a fuss. Incidentally, the vampires didn't do anything." "Excellent work," he returned his attention to the table. "I agree that capturing a foothold with no casualties deserves to be called a grand victory." "And what of the vampires?" I asked, annoyed. "Fighting the dwarves is not their task. They may choose to help us if they wish, but their fight is in the Night Kingdom." "Did the Marquess really order us to clear a path to the Night Kingdom for them?" "Yes." "Then why didn't we skip this village and simply capture the town? It would have been much more fun. We do not need to capture the town to allow the vampires access to the Night Kingdom. We can either capture the town or two more small villages. The villages offer a means of ingress into the Night Kingdom with minimal casualties." "But we will have to capture the town eventually," I pointed out. "Would it not be better to do so while it is still relatively undefended?" "Not if it hinders our objective. Losing soldiers to an unnecessary battle runs the risk of doing exactly that. In addition, once we obtain our point of ingress, we must wait for the orcs to move their armies. If they become aware of our position, we will likely be their first target. That will hinder our ability to aid the vampires. Have you initiated a count of the prisoners?" My jaw clenched to suppress an angry growl. Our goal was to conquer all of these lands, not just to help the fucking vampires. Hergarus didn't seem to care about the overall vision, only specifically what the Marquess had told him to do. In addition, it was uniquely infuriating to be treated like a newly risen by being asked if I had accomplished such a simple and mundane task. It was even more frustrating that it had, in fact, slipped my mind. Not yet," I stammered. "We're still pulling them from their cellars." That was a lie, and I knew that I had made a grave mistake the moment it left my lips. Hergarus stood and approached me until his face was an inch away from my own. I kept my composure, silently cursing my stupidity. My power was not unremarkable, but it was nothing compared to the demon who was now staring me down. "You led me to believe that the villagers had already been captured, and that their submission came from deception," he said in a deceptively calm tone. "Yet now you claim there are villagers hiding in their cellars, as if they were aware of our attack and able to flee. Which is the lie?" Words escaped me for a moment. For the first time since I had discovered him, I saw actual anger upon his visage. It quickly banished the thought that he wouldn't destroy me because of my value. No, Hergarus the Decimator is the type of demon that would eliminate any obstacle to his goals, regardless of the origin of that obstacle. I would have to choose my words carefully. "I apologize, sir," I said cautiously. "I was merely creating an excuse for a momentary lapse in competence. All of the villagers have been captured, and I will initiate a count immediately." "Correction. You will initiate a count the moment we are finished here, and you will call for a count every time we come to a halt. In addition, if even a single villager goes missing, you will personally lead the hunting party to bring them back," he replied. I watched in terror as his hand methodically made its way towards my face. Only demons who have never taken corporeal form don't include pain receptors in their bodies, namely because they don't realize how useful pain can be for keeping one's form intact. There's no better way to be informed of an injury than to have that injury hurt. I managed not to squeal in terror as my eye lost focus whilst tracking Hergarus's thumb. It involuntarily closed as the thumb made contact, his fingers gripping the back of my skull. Then I felt several sensations that would have been rather interesting were it not for the searing pain that accompanied them. Hergarus used his fingers to press his thumb into my eye, smashing it against the sphenoid bone. This applied an intense and extremely painful pressure to the surrounding nerves. A moment later, I felt the eye rupture and white-hot fluids gush into my nasal cavity. My neurons screamed at me as they attempted to process what was happening, but I continued to maintain my composure. The pain was definitely one of the worst that I had experienced, but the destruction of my eye was only a temporary hindrance, for it would heal fairly quickly. I would have considered it a kindness unbefitting of a demon had that been the only part of my punishment. Whilst attempting to answer one of the vampire's many questions about our kind, I found that it is difficult to adequately describe the actual process in which a demon consumes another's essence. I attempted to explain that our true forms are in multiple places at once, but our consciousness is tied to our physical forms. Yet paradoxically, we can operate the base functions of our true form with no alteration to our consciousness. I also attempted to explain that time and space ultimately mean nothing to our true form, and as such, there's no such thing as a location to it. Obviously, the vampire didn't understand. I was able to articulate how vicious it normally is, though. The closer two daemons are in power, the harder it is for them to feed off of one another. I likened it to two predators trying to consume each other whilst also fighting for territory. But when one demon is much stronger than the other, there is no fighting involved. The weaker daemon simply stands no chance of putting up any sort of resistance to the consumption. As such, I barely noticed Hergarus take a piece of my true form. It wasn't much, perhaps the physical equivalent of the excess toenail of one's pinky toe, but it had a profound impact as a statement. He had destroyed my eye to remind me that he was my commander, but he ate part of me to remind me that he was much, much more powerful than me. So much more powerful, in fact, that I wasn't even a snack to him. "You will not lie to me again," Hergarus said, hammering home the threat. "Yes, sir," I bowed, fluid spilling from my face onto the floor. "Have someone clean that up." Dismissed. I left the command tent with a speed that I didn't even know my physical form possessed. When I was a reasonable distance away from any witnesses, I collapsed to my knees. Pain and terror sent tremors through my body, and there was little I could do to stop them. Stupid, I chided myself. Stupid, dumb, foolish, idiotic, imbecilic, fucking moron. I had spent far too much time amongst mortals and weaker demons. It had been all too easy to forget how powerful demons operate, and this forgetfulness had nearly cost me my progress. For a brief moment, I envied the weaker demons. They had only spent decades, perhaps centuries, building themselves up. I had been at it for several millennia. The amount of effort it would take to reform myself as I am now was— "No point in thinking about that," I muttered, speaking to myself in an attempt to try to catch my breath. "So long as I don't fuck up again, that won't happen." Once the trembling stopped, I rose to my feet and found a lesser demon. It eyed my injury warily, but listened to my orders and ran to accomplish them. I watched with my one good eye as the demon found other demons to assist him with the tasks I had given. With a sigh, I put a finger into my eye socket and tore the destroyed organ from my head. Intense pain shot through my skull, but it quickly died down to a dull ache as a new eye began to form. I examined the ruptured eye with a sense of anxiety. A couple of thoughts above my station and a slip of the tongue had nearly cost me everything. Underestimating Hergarus had been an amateur mistake. Yes, I found him as an empty husk who didn't even know what he was. I had also brought him back into the fold, but I was a fool to expect that I was owed anything for that. One could argue that the fact that he didn't immediately decimate me for my disrespect was more than repayment enough. With a sigh to settle myself, I tossed my former eye aside and decided to supervise the demons to ensure that they properly counted the villagers. Thus far, it had only been my leg, my eye, and a small portion of my essence that had been destroyed. I didn't dare speculate what might be next. 49, sir," a demon said, running up to me. "We have 49 villagers, all dwarves, 8 men, 10 women, 7 boys, 10 girls, 6 old men, and 8 old women." "Any injuries?" I asked, clearing my sinus onto the ground. The daemon and I stared at the half-congealed mass of goop for a moment. No, sir. No injuries or illnesses that we can determine at this time." "Chain them together and prepare to march. We have more villages to capture." "Yes, sir." The demon ran off, and I kicked some dirt over the disgusting mass that had exited my face. Then I quietly confirmed the count as the demons positioned the villagers into a line and adjusted their restraints. The chains clinked softly as the demons poked at the villagers mockingly. With a deep breath, I returned to the command tent. "I return," I said to the tent flap. "Enter," came the reply. Gathering my nerve, I lifted the flap and entered the tent. The bloody mess my face had left had been cleaned. Hergerus had returned to his seat at the war table and was absent-mindedly fidgeting with a markstone. His gaze shifted from the map, and he regarded me with a cold disinterest. "The count has been completed," I said, bowing. "All of the villagers are dwarves. 8 adult males, 10 adult females, 7 male children, 10 female children, 6 elderly males, and 8 elderly females. 49 in total." "A small village indeed," Hergerus mused. "It would have been shameful to have received any casualties." "Issue 4 guards and prepare the villagers for the march." "Yes, sir. I've already had them chained together, and we're ready to march once the guards have been assigned." "I commend your initiative. A competent aide is an extremely valuable asset, but only if they know their place. Do you?" "Yes, sir." "Where is it?" Demons don't have many traditions. Most attempts to establish them see their followers consumed by those with less dogmatic views. There is one demonic tradition that goes farther back than even the mortal plane's existence, though: submission to power. "Either leaping to fulfill your orders or beneath your heel, sir," I said with a deep bow. "Good," he nodded. "Keep that in mind, Thalamus, until the day you're powerful enough to actually challenge me. If you make the mistake of issuing a passive challenge again, I will consume you without a second thought." "Understood, sir." The next village is 4 days away at a steady march. With the captives, though, it should take roughly 6 days. Once you have finished assigning guards, have food and water gathered for the captives. Ensure there is no unnecessary destruction. Any future visitors to this village should be left wondering what happened to the villagers, with nary a clue to go on. "Yes, sir." Dismissed. I turned and left the tent with a new determination. I was able to recognize the carrot and stick method of leadership, of course, but avoiding the stick and gaining the carrot still felt good. Especially since the stick was the threat of losing eons of progress. I chose 4 demons, who seemed to have their wits about them, and assigned them to guard the villagers. Then I ordered the other demons to carefully gather food and water. I made it absolutely clear that any destruction would result in consumption. The demons quickly set about their tasks, and before long everything was ready. It was time to move on to the next village. Chapter 1, 114. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 11, Human American. I found myself extremely disoriented, unable to remember where I was or how I got there. It felt as if I was floating, but in air instead of water. Or space, maybe. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but white. My sense of panic was stifled by a feeling of familiarity, though. I'd been here before, hadn't I? When? How? "It has been a while, but surely I'm more memorable than that," a feminine voice whispered within my head. There was no directionality to the voice, so I looked around wildly. A woman stood to my right, looking downward so that I couldn't see her face. Her long, silky and grey hair parted as she looked up at me with eyes that were nearly neon purple. The creature's lips, blackened past the point that lipstick could ever hope to achieve, parted in a smile and showed a set of razor-sharp fangs instead of teeth. What? I managed to stammer before my air ran out. Panic set in only for a moment before I remembered the last time this had happened to me. Just after I used all of my magic to heal Imlaw, the merchant that gave us a ride a few times. I finally recognized my location and what the thing beside me was. "There you go," the higher one said with a chuckle. "Took you long enough." "What's this about?" I thought. "It's time for another nudge. You're almost back in Nulava, where it all began. Well, for you." I remembered leaving the town with the kobolds. Nash had been upset because we weren't stopping for rest or meals, which meant that Yulk had paid a lot. Our driver, Hack, had been using an enchanted powder to stay awake, and I had finally been tired enough to fall asleep on the fast-moving cart. "It's where you wanted us to go, right?" I asked. "Needed you to go too, but yes," it laughed. "We tried our best to get you to this point naturally, but it simply wasn't meant to be." "What do you mean?" "I can't give you a direct answer. All I can say is that an unlikely timeline has decided to manifest, and it's rather inconvenient to the plans we had, and have, for you. I heard the clink of chains between the being's words. I remembered the crimson links that had bound it in our previous conversation, but I couldn't see them this time. Here's your nudge, Nick, bright purple eyes locked with my own. You are now strong enough to reach and surpass the true end of the Delver's dungeon, the very one you were found in. Barely. Barely? Yes. As I said, we had other hopes that were dashed by the choices of others. In the ideal version of this timeline, we would have been able to yank you around long enough for you to get far more powerful than you are now. Powerful enough to have made the journey by yourself, in fact. Personally, I'd have loved to see you absolutely dominate the monsters in the dungeon. So, as you can imagine, I'm quite cross with those that have moved up our plans. Right, I thought hesitantly. The moment you arrive in New Leva, you need to resupply and prepare to enter the dungeon. You don't have enough time to rest. You must enter by nightfall at the latest. Nash may refuse to join you or be called away for something else, but he's inconsequential to your success. Don't waste time trying to keep him with you. And what's at the end of the dungeon? First, you'll find a boss that no one else has found. After you defeat it, you will find a revelation and an additional confrontation. The revelation will come first. Regarding the confrontation, though, run. Run? I asked incredulously. Yes, it would be a close fight even if you were your most powerful self. You're not, and so you should run, ideally collapsing or sealing the dungeon behind you. Collapse the dungeon. How would we do that? Larry will be able to. It's the reason we urged him to join you. Oh, I nearly forgot to mention that the village chief will likely wish to see you and the others upon your arrival. Don't risk offending him. His cooperation is imperative for what comes next. And what comes next, exactly? Oh, you'll see, the higher one winked at me. Well, unless you fuck up. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Wait, I said, my eyes snapping open. Instead of a white void, I was looking up at the big blue sky. A few clouds lazily drifted by as the cart bumped the back of my head. Then the faces of my adoptive orc brothers popped into view. That's probably not good, Nash sighed. It might have been a normal dream, Yulk suggested. It wasn't, I replied. Damn, Nash said, leaning back as I sat up. Hack looked over his shoulder at me as I moved to the front of the cart to get a look at where we were. The dwarf's bloodshot eyes were full of questions, but he kindly kept them to himself. I wondered if the powder he had been using was actually magical, or if it was actually just a mundane drug. Either way, he hadn't been getting much rest. Neither had the schnasses. Apparently, though, they didn't need anywhere near as much rest as people do. My grandpa would have loved these creatures. He often complained about how lazy horses could be if you let them. Buildings were just coming into view, and they were approaching quickly. Or rather, we were. I glanced at the sky and noted that the sun wasn't directly overhead. What time is it? I asked. Mid-morning, Larry replied. You didn't sleep long. I had already suspected as much due to the exhaustion I felt behind my eyes. The altar's spare bed was practically calling to me, but I wouldn't be given the opportunity to sleep in a bed tonight. I briefly wondered if I had enough time for another nap, but then we began to slow. All right, we're here, Huck said with a relieved sigh. I'm going to stick around and rest for about a week. If you need another rush ride before then, you'll have to hire someone else. It wouldn't be safe for me to drive you. Understood, Yulk replied as the cart came to a halt. Thank you. Nash and I grabbed our things and hopped off of the cart. Yulk passed me his bags as Nash helped him to the ground, while Lari simply floated from the back of the cart. Hack drove the cart off of the road leading into Nuleva, seeking refuge in the nearby stable. So what was the dream about? Nash asked. I began explaining what had happened in my dream as we made our way into the village. Most of the people that saw us stopped and stared with horrified expressions. They were looking at Larry, though, and I felt bad that this made me feel a little better about all the times I'd been stared at with curiosity. Clearing the dungeon has been done before, Nash said, glaring at people as we passed. What's with the urgency? I don't know. There's a secret boss or something, I think, I shrugged. It was less vague this time, but still pretty cagey. Also, it said that you don't have to come with us if you don't want to. Nash looked confused, but didn't reply. I finished explaining the rest of the details of what the higher one told me, ending with us needing to see the chief. As I finished my sentence, I noticed Nima running up to us. "Hey Nima," Yulk waved happily. "Hi Yulk," Nima replied as she came to a stop, staring nervously at Lari. We stood patiently, waiting for her to say something else. She seemed to be at a loss, though. "What is it, darling?" Nash asked gently. What? Oh, right. The chief wants to see you," she replied, not taking her eyes off of the lich. My first impression of Nima had been that she was incredibly beautiful and intimidating. She was a lot taller than I was, and I had no doubt in my mind that she was a lot stronger too. Seeing her this nervous was surreal. For the first time since I met him, it sunk home how dangerous Lari could be, were he so inclined. It also occurred to me that the higher one had placed its faith in his destructive capabilities. Actually, faith is probably the wrong word for a being that can see almost everything. "He's not a threat, love," Nash said, maintaining his soft tone. "This is Lari Visimiro. He was turned into a lich against his will." I know that. It's just—" Nima shook her head and bowed. "I didn't intend to cause any offense, Lord Visimiro. We received a missive from High Chief Ulamak explaining your situation and presence within the unified chiefdoms. Knowing Yulk's predilections and your proximity to him, I should have taken more time to mentally prepare myself. Please accept my deepest apologies." "Hey," Yulk said, feigning offense. "Please raise your head. Your reaction is well within expectations, and I could hardly consider it rude," Lari chuckled. "One should hold oneself to the highest of standards, and my reaction to seeing my reflection for the first time was not dissimilar." "How would you know, though?" Yulk asked innocently. Everyone present paused at Yulk's question, taking a moment to decipher what he was asking. Larry cocked his head at the bald orc. After a moment of thought, though, the confused expressions that Nash, Nima, and I had quickly turned to horror. "Oh, because I have no face," Larry laughed. "I was speaking of my emotional reaction, my friend. My physical reaction was about the same as it is now, only with my jaw agape." "Ah, I see." "We should probably go see the chief," I interrupted. "Good idea," Nima replied. "Oh, and nice to see you again, Nick." She led the way to the big building in the center of the village. It had gotten even bigger since I'd last seen it. Yulk and I shared a confused glance, but Nash looked at us both with a smirk. "I helped with the renovations," he said as we entered the building. "How were we able to afford it?" Yulk asked. "The chief will get mad if I ruin the surprise." "Oh, I see. So Nuliva has been upgraded from settlement to village." Fuck. Before they could say anything else, we entered a large room. In the center of it was Chief Gluhern, sitting on a chair that looked pretty comfortable. Surrounding him were old orcs sitting on cushions. They froze as we entered, and it wasn't hard to guess why. After a moment of silence, the old orcs rose from their cushions and left the room. "Greetings, Lord Visimiro," Gluhern nodded his head. "To what do we owe this unexpected—" "Oh, I see you're with the altar boys. Never mind." "Come now, Chief Gluhern," Yulk grinned. "If you're going to put on airs, you could at least commit." "Don't chastise me, spell slinger," Gluhern shouted, then looked around. "Oh, for fuck's sake." The memory of the last time I heard Gluhern shout at Yulk suddenly popped into my mind. The chief's new seat was well away from anything that could be thrown. Yulk's grin widened, but Nash put a hand on his shoulder. "Why have we been summoned, Chief?" he asked. "Well, the surprise has already been spoiled for you, Nash, but I wanted to let Yulk and Nick know that thanks to your visit to the High Chief, Nuleva is now officially a village instead of a settlement. Since the three of you are finally gathered before me, please accept my sincerest gratitude." "Of course," Yulk bowed, "always glad to serve." "Yaha," Gluhern's expression dropped. "Anyways, our upgrade to village comes with several bonuses. For one thing, we are no longer under an obligation to trade solely with Kirkana and visitors. Our tax rebate has also increased, allowing for some much-needed upgrades to our infrastructure, such as it is. Finally, there's the matter of the village guard. Larry and I were kind of lost, but Nash and Yulk stared at the chief. Nuleva, being a dungeon-based village, is legally required to maintain a guard against threats both external and internal," Gluhern explained. "I have been looking into the matter, and it would appear that hiring people who don't live here is more likely to lead to corruption and abuse of power. Get to the point, Gluhern, Yulk said coldly. Nash Alta, I would like you to lead the guard. You will be charged with recruitment, training, and the enforcement of our laws. And I'll have to retire from being an adventurer, Nash said. Yes. No, get a learn to do it. Nima looked at her betrothed with concern. Nash dash. He held up a hand to interrupt her. Gluhern watched the exchange and sighed. You think that a troublemaker like you was my first choice, boy? He asked. Alern has opted to take up residence in Kirkana. It would seem that the deaths of Kirisaka and Pakin have resulted in too many bad memories for him to remain in Nuliva. Shit, Nash whispered. Indeed. I pulled the records for every adventurer that grew up here, and you're the only non-mage above level 10. Congrats, by the way. Yeah, thanks. So I'm left with the choice of hoping that you've matured, or choosing someone who doesn't know their ass from their elbow. Since lives are on the line, experience matters more than maturity, though. It has to be you, Nash. When? Immediately. We're already in breach, and we can't afford more than one fine, even with the rebate. The chief sighed again. This is a good opportunity, Nash. Your brother is a professor, and you're about to be married. Guard captain is a good, steady job with decent pay and not much risk. Why are you hesitant? Nash gave us a guilty glance. We came back to enter the dungeon, Nash explained. Why? There's something at the end of it. I can't just. I reached up and put a hand on his shoulder. He turned to me with shock on his face that quickly turned somber when he saw my expression. The village needs you more than we do right now, Nash, I said. We'll be fine. You can't know that, he argued. Yulk and Larry are extremely competent mages, and by your own admission, I'm not exactly bad with the sword. We can do it. Plus, remember what I said earlier? Nash said, glancing between Yulk and I, but fine. You'd better take care of each other, though. We most certainly will, Yulk said. Chief Gluhern, I offer my deepest apologies, but we're on a tight schedule. I turned to the chief. If there isn't anything else, may we depart? Yes, Gluhern nodded. Nash and I need to work out the details of his new career, but the rest of you may go. We said our farewells to Nash and Nima, then went straight to the market. People continued to stare as we picked up food and potions. Larry didn't seem to mind, but I couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same way that I did when people stared at me. Are there guides that we can hire for this dungeon? Larry asked as we approached the entrance. There were a few adventurers hanging out around the entrance, but their reactions to Larry were a lot more muted. I couldn't tell if it was because they mistakenly thought they could take him, or because they had received some sort of forewarning about him. There are guides, yes, but they mostly help lower-level adventurers survive their first dive, Yulk explained. Delver's dungeon is fairly straightforward. The main issue is going to be the teleportation. This dungeon periodically resets itself, and when it does, it teleports explorers to the entrance, and all defeated monsters and bosses regenerate and shift positions. Another reason that a guide wouldn't be particularly useful, actually. We'll figure out the teleportation if it becomes a problem, I said. Let's go. With full packs, determination, and barely enough sleep, we entered the darkness of the Delver's dungeon. Chapter 115. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 11, Human American. The dungeon started out far less hectic than I had initially thought it would be. I had imagined that we would be fighting a ton of monsters, but we spent the entire first day just walking, occasionally passing a group of adventurers on their way out. All three groups that we passed did an alarmed double-take when they saw Larry, but quickly calmed down when Yulk explained things. We set up a camp with a barrier, and I was so exhausted that I slept like a rock. After a quick breakfast for Yulk and I, we continued our trek. The dungeon's interior changed from dingy stone to a type of polished metal that reflected our lights. This made it much brighter, but also meant that every now and then it would be blinding. Never thought that I'd wish for sunglasses in a cave, I muttered, shielding my eyes. What are sunglasses? Larry asked. They're like lenses that are held in a frame that fit over your eyes. The lenses are darkened with a film that helps block some light, but not all light, so you can still see. We have those, Yulk chuckled. But only waste wanderers use them because the face mask is quite uncomfortable. Oh, our sunglasses aren't a mask. Not really. They're this little frame that holds the lenses and fits over your ears and nose. Or the bridge of your nose, rather. Well, that also sounds uncomfortable, Larry said, and quite useless to those of us without noses, ears, or eyes, but it would appear that we have other concerns. The lich pointed ahead of us, and I turned to see small chunks of the wall come free. 6 glimmering shards silently floated toward us and blocked our path. They were shaped like crystals and had a teal light where one might expect their eyes to be. Drones, Yulk explained. It appears that the machines have appeared pretty early in this configuration. That's quite unfortunate. Are they tough? I asked, drawing my sword. Yes, if there are parties ahead of us, we may need to rescue them. If they're still alive, of course. The idea of stumbling across corpses sent a small shiver down my spine. The memory of the feral human we'd encountered was far from fresh, but it had left a lasting impression. We stared at the drones, who shifted their formation slightly. Why aren't they attacking? I whispered. Most of the machines won't attack unless you try to bypass or attack them. Perhaps they believe it to be discourteous to strike first. Yulk chuckled and shrugged. There are some orcanoid ones that will attack on sight, though. Orcanoid? Yes, shaped like an orc. Ah. Our staring contest with the drones continued for a moment while I thought about the best way to deal with them. I looked at Yulk and Larry, who seemed to be waiting for me to come to a decision. I didn't know if it was because they had decided that I was the party leader, or if they had already decided what they were going to do and were waiting on my slow ass. Do you know how they attack? I asked. They use a beam of light. From exactly where you would imagine, Yulk answered. They can also move pretty quick, which allows for significant impacts in melee. Can we attack one without the others becoming aggravated? Nope. Do they know when we're about to attack, or do they wait for the attack to hit? That's a good question. Yulk rubbed his chin. I usually use electrical pulse to halt their movements, then Nash finishes them off with his axe. Doesn't work on the bigger ones, though, so we usually run when we see them. Will my sword even cut those things? They're made of glass. I'd use the dull side if you can. The basket guard prevented me from holding the sword in any other position, meaning I would have to swing backward. Not exactly a comfortable attack, but doable. I nodded and readied myself as Yulk raised his hand. Eslup la surcheletsak, he shouted. I expected a crackling of energy or something, but the only way that I could tell that the spell worked was that the drones fell to the ground. Leaping forward, I backhanded my sword into the first drone. It cracked into several pieces, and I lifted a finger at another drone as I continued to move. Telubtsak! The bullet landed a direct hit and shattered the drone. Then I used the basket guard to punch 2 more. 2 arcs of electricity shot past me, making my hair stand on end and destroying the last 2 drones. I looked back at Yulk and Larry just as they were lowering their hands. Did you 2 cast the same spell at the same time? I asked. I believe so, Larry said. Standard lightning spell? Yulk shrugged and chuckled. Quick and painless. For me, at least. I just thought it was cool that you did it in unison, I said, nudging one of the drones with my boot. Is there anything useful in these? No, just glass. Or crystal, maybe. All right, let's keep going. The glass from the drones crunched beneath my feet as I pressed on, followed closely by Yulk and Larry. The mirror-like corridor began to feel oppressive as it continued to stretch indefinitely before us. I was beginning to think that the primary danger of this dungeon was boredom and mirages when we began to hear the sound of running. We spread out a little and took up defensive stances, but relaxed a bit as a group of orcs emerged from the mirage caused by the multitude of mirrors. Once they became a bit clearer, though, we tensed up again. They were running as fast as they could manage, and the closer they got, the more obvious it was that they had been roughed up pretty badly. The largest of the group was carrying someone bridal style. "Run!" the big orc shouted toward us. "Fuck, that's a lich." An orc carrying a pole slid to a stop. "We're dead. We're so dead." "We're friendly," Yulk raised a hand. "What pursues you?" "B-bots," big guy panted. "Lots of bots." "Shit. Well, we can't run, so we'll cover your retreat," I said. "You'll fucking die, Wait, what the fuck are you?" That's that human thingy. Uh, Nick, I think, a beaten-up archer helpfully added. Oh yeah. Like the human said, we cannot run, Larry said. We will not begrudge you your retreat, though. Go. There's no way the three of you can hold them off long enough for help to arrive, the big guy said. I don't know, Garlin. Leeches are pretty damn powerful, Pole Orc replied. Maybe we should listen to them. Arua Gnilaitsak? Larry held out his hand. The other party flinched as a barely perceptible blue light enveloped us all. However, a moment later, their wounds began to heal. The large gash on Big Guy's forehead, a cut across Pole Orc's nose, and a bruise on the archer's jaw disappeared. But before they could react, the sound of rapid metal footsteps began to fill the corridor. Fight or flee, choose now, Larry said sternly. Fuck it, I'm fighting, Garlin said, setting down his unconscious friend. You guys can keep running. Fuck, Pole Orc shouted, then sighed. If you fight, we have to fight too. No, you. Yeah, we do. We aren't alone. We don't leave comrades behind. How many are there? I asked as the footsteps grew louder. It was an ambush. We didn't get a chance to count. The only reason we got away is because I threw up a pretty thick ice wall. That took a lot out of me, so I don't have much left in the tank as far as magic goes. And I dropped my hammer to pick up Ithema, Garlin explained. But my fists are nearly as good, and I've got some defensive skills. Arrows won't normally do much to the bots, but I have a skill that will let me fire a penetrating arrow every 15 seconds or so, the archer added. Okay, everyone with ranged attacks get ready for an initial volley, I said. Electrical attacks will probably work best. Penetrative attacks are your fallback. Leave our center open so Garlin can get through to block for us. Everyone nodded and moved to make a sort of firing line just as the robots came into view. They weren't running so much as they were marching really quickly. It almost looked like power walking. I had been expecting clunky hunks of metal, but the bots were much more human-looking or orc-looking than that. As they drew closer, I realized that they even had faces carved into their metallic heads. Their left hand was a blade, about 8 inches long, and their right hand looked like the head of a sledgehammer. Not something someone would want to get into a hand-to-hand fight with. Feeling nervous for Garlin, I stepped forward and raised a finger. Telub-tsak. The bullet formed and fired, striking the nearest robot directly in the chest. It left a dent, but the robot continued marching toward us, completely unperturbed. I swore under my breath as I tried to figure out my next move. An arrow whistled past me and struck the same robot in the head. It fell to the ground, and the one behind it stepped on it as it continued its march. Then 3 lightning spells launched forward, dropping 3 more robots. I tried to count the remaining ones, but lost count at 12. Larry launched another lightning spell, but Yolk and the other mage needed a moment to gather their strength. The Pole Orc's wounds had healed, but his magic obviously hadn't rejuvenated. Nilevaj Echi, I shouted, casting Ice Javelin at one of the robots. Predictably, it shattered against the robot's metal head without doing any damage. Thankfully, an arrow appeared where the Ice Javelin had struck. I tried to think of what other attack I could do that had penetrating power, but all that came to mind was adding metal to the bullet. Or, I imagined that instead of a bullet, a small cannonball formed. Then I imagined it firing as fast as the bullet did. With that mental picture in mind, I raised my finger. Telub Sack, I shouted. A hole appeared between the carved eyes of one of the robots, and I almost jumped for joy. But I also felt that spell take a lot of my magic. I would have to wait for my magic to regenerate between shots. Or faint. I'm jumping in, Garlin shouted. Wait, I said, remembering another spell. Yulk cast another lightning bolt as I stepped forward and put my hand to the ground. Sreps Kor Sak. 8 stone spears suddenly appeared to stab their way through the ground and into some of the bots. 7 of them were taken out of the fight, but one of them only lost their hammer hand. I did another quick count, 9 bots left. Okay, keep them back, I said. The 9 remaining bots navigated their way around the spears as Garin sped past me. His fist slammed into the one-armed robot's head hard enough to force it to stumble back. He dodged its counterattack and hit it again, leaving a noticeable dent. I was tempted to join him and test out the training that I'd received from the punishing hands of Thunra. Two bolts of lightning from Larry and the pole orc sailing past my head made me realize how stupid that would be. Instead, I fired another steel bullet at the bot that was trying to flank Garen. An arrow and Yulk's lightning shot past me, and we were down to 4 bots left. I fired another bullet, but missed because I took a step back as I was doing it. The reason I stepped back was because 3 of the robots were ignoring Garen and gaining ground fast. I heard a gasp and watched Pole Orc fall to his knees. He'd used too much magic, and I nearly had as well. Yulk looked pretty tired too, but thankfully Larry still had some in the tank. His lighting caught another one of the bots. Realizing that if I backed up too far, the bots would attack everyone else, I made a decision. I hoped that I would have the benefit of hindsight to determine if it was a dumb one. I drew my sword and activated Spear Punch, using the basket guard to protect my hand. I flew forward and smashed the guard against the face of one of the bots. Fortunately, the blow was enough to crush the bot's head. Unfortunately, it crushed around the guard and dragged my sword with it as it fell. 2 bots remained, and one of them focused on me. Preternatural evasion activated as the bot's blade slashed at my throat. I ducked under its follow-up strike with the hammer and used Breathtaker Strike. Its chest caved in with a crunch, but the bot took another swing at me. I leapt back to avoid the blows, and 3 things happened at once. The other bot dropped with an arrow through its head, lightning struck the bot I was fighting, and a searing pain shot through my hand as I tried to open my fist. I took a moment to check on it and immediately wished that I hadn't. My fingers weren't pointing in the directions that I had believed them to be, and blood was pouring from a split in my knuckles. I clenched my jaw as I felt the scream begin to bubble up in my throat. "Oh, come on," Ten complained. I wanted to tell it to suck a plug, fuck itself or something like that. But the pain was too intense. Even if I tried to think at 10, I'd just end up screaming. "I'll kill the pain as best as I can. In the meantime, fight with your left hand, stick to magic." The pain began to ebb just as Garen managed to get behind the bot he was fighting and tear its head off. "Never mind. Okay, moving on, I can't heal your hand in the state that it's in. You'll need to put it back together as best as you can." "Fuck you," I managed to think. "I know it's grotesque, but we can fix it." "No, not that." I examined my mangled hand. "For earlier." "Oh, you're mad at me for getting frustrated that you punched a chunk of metal. Don't try to diminish it and make it out to be my fault. I was in a life or death situation and did the best that I could. Your reaction was over the top and unsupportive." I pulled and twisted my fingers to realign them, wincing at the sight and sound rather than the pain. Once they were all pointing in the same direction again, I squeezed my hand back together. A moment later it began to itch, and I watched as the flesh began to mend. After thinking it through, "You have a point," Ten said. "I apologize." "Thank you," I replied, "and I apologize for acting rashly and making you fix my hand." "Is that going to be okay?" the archer orc asked. I then realized that everyone that was still conscious had watched me put my hand back together. The strangers looked horrified, but Yulk looked slightly bemused. Lari's posture suggested concern, though his face looked the same as it always did. "Oh, yeah, it'll be fine," I stammered. "I heal fast." "How fast?" Garen asked. "This fast." I opened and closed my hand. I had tried to wiggle my fingers, but they weren't cooperating. I hoped it wasn't permanent and that Ten was still healing it. Pole Orc stood up, leaning heavily on his nicknamesake. "We actually did it," he panted. I can't believe it." "Believe it," I replied, and gave him a thumbs up with my freshly healed hand. "Believe what?" We turned toward the new voice and saw that the unconscious orc had woken up, and she was absolutely terrified. I didn't even have to follow her stare to know what she was looking at. Poor Larry. Chapter 116. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 11, Human American. The freshly awakened orc was absolutely frozen in terror at the sight of Larry. She stared at us with wide eyes while we stood frozen, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, Garen sighed, then walked over to her and kneeled. "Hey, there's nothing to be afraid of. They're friendly and saved our asses," he said gently. "Are you okay?" Yeah, what happened?" Friendly," she stammered. "Yes, friendly. We'd be dead if they weren't, right? Can you stand?" Probably. And I guess that makes sense. How long was I out? Not that long. You took a pretty nasty hit from that hammer, but the lich healed you, Garen said, helping Sleepy to her feet. Healed the rest of us too. Once he was sure she was steady, he turned back to us. Thank you for all of your help, he said. And thank you for yours, I replied. Wait, aren't you that human everyone has been talking about? Sleepy asked. Yeah, this dungeon is where they found me, I said. Oh shit, we haven't done introductions yet, have we? Garen asked with a laugh. I'm Garen, our party's two-handed specialist. Korea here is our healer, Nith is our archer, and Doston is our mage. It is a pleasure to meet you, Yulk said with a small bow. I am Yulk. This is Nick Smith and Larry Vicemiro. Larry and I nodded our heads as Yulk gestured at us. Whoa, wait. Yulk? Garen asked, as in Nash and Yulk of Clan Alta. Yulk's face fell a little, and I clocked why pretty quickly. He didn't really want the fanfare that came with being a member of Clan Alta at the moment, or the reputation that came with being part of Nash and Yulk. We should probably keep moving, I interrupted. I'm tired, but… You're right, Yulk said, sneaking me a grateful look. I'm afraid that we are in quite a rush and must press on. Really? Even after all that? Garen replied, gesturing to the broken robots. Why? It's a rather long story, and as I said, we're pressed for time. Garen stared at us for a moment, seemingly lost for words. Then he turned to look at his party. Pole Orc, or Doston, pinched the bridge of his nose with a sigh. Don't… We should go with them, Garen interrupted the exasperated mage. They saved our asses, and we owe it to them. We helped them save our asses, Doston argued. Sure, it was nice of them, but ultimately, we… Nah, we should go with, Nith said, adjusting his bow, if they'll let us. Well, I trailed off, glancing at Yulk and Larry. Their presence may increase the odds of our success, Larry said, especially if we can retrieve Garen's hammer. That's another reason we need to go with them, Garen laughed. That hammer was expensive, not to mention the fact that we dropped our packs to run faster. Yep, all of our loot was in the packs, Nith added. We either push forward with these guys, or we return as penniless beggars. I don't know about you, Doston, but I've got bills to pay. Everyone stared at Doston, and after a few moments he sighed dramatically. Fine, he grumbled. A few glances were shared, but no further arguments were made. I pulled my sword out of the robot's face as Garen joined me at the front of our formation. Then we continued further into the dungeon. After walking for a while, he cleared his throat. So, what brings you to Delver's dungeon? He asked. We've got to get to the end of the dungeon, I shrugged. The end? Yup. Well, that's a noteworthy goal. From what Doston says, only 2 groups have made it that far, though. According to the records, Doston added, there have been several attempts, but only 2 groups have faced the final boss and emerged victorious. Yeah, I imagine the reset and teleportation thing has something to do with that, I laughed. But for reasons I can't get into, I don't think that's going to be a problem for us. Some sort of human magic? The mage asked. He said reasons he can't get into, Garen scolded. Wait, you're a he, right? Yep. So humans have females? Yep. What do they look like? Is it like with us and elves and such? There were several more questions of a similar nature, but I answered them to the best of my abilities. We ran into some more drones, but they were easily dispatched with Yulk's electrical pulse spell. Eventually we stumbled upon the orc stuff. Since Doston and Yulk were on the verge of exhaustion, we decided to rest. Nith and Kirea used Doston's heat stone to make a soup, and I was surprised at how much my mood improved from the warm meal. It was a very meaty soup, but it still tasted better than the dried foods. I set my cup down and watched the symbols dance along the shields, wondering how we were going to get any sleep, with the mirror-like walls reflecting the light dozens of times over. Won't be long before we reach the machine boss, Garen said, checking his hammer for damage. What do we know about it? It's a large construct, originally believed to be an iron golem, Doston explained between soupy sips. Its behavior is akin to that of a drone, meaning it won't attack unless we show aggression by attacking or attempting to bypass it. It has been noted to have extremely effective ranged attacks that are almost impossible to dodge, and its melee attacks are pulverizing. So hit it with all we have right at the jump and hope that drops it, I added with a yawn. That has been the most effective strategy for defeating it so far, yes. Some parties with extra durable shield bearers have managed to beat it without an overwhelming opening salvo. But our shield bearer retired. Retired? Yeah, for personal reasons we can't get into. Garin grinned and winked at me. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Doston chuckled, though it is somewhat of a long story. We've got time, Nith said. You want to tell it or can I? I'll do it, Korea smiled. Our party originally formed in Blurpus, at the behest of Great Chief Tormon. Our mission was to hunt some beasts that were attacking caravans, and we meshed really well. Once we took care of the beasts, we decided to continue to work together and began taking quests. She explained that the group took a few jobs together, then decided to start exploring dungeons. After their third run, which paid pretty well, but not as well as they had hoped, their shield-bearer revealed that she had been silently suffering from claustrophobia. Instead of forcing the party to return to waste wandering to accommodate her, she opted to retire as an adventurer. The rest of the group respected her decision, and she returned to her family while her party continued diving into dungeons. Eventually, she became a guard captain for Great Chief Tormon. We were thrilled to hear it, of course, Korea laughed. By the time we got the news, though, we'd already moved here. A few months before they found you, actually. Yep, Garin nodded. Our first run went pretty well, so we decided to do another dive, and then another, and another. Our latest, as you've seen, hasn't gone all that well, Doston said, so now that we've shared… Right. Well, I'm not comfortable going into detail, but… I trailed off and looked at them for a moment. They seemed to be decent enough people, but I couldn't shake the warning that the higher one gave me upon our first meeting. So I explained our goal instead of the journey thus far. I told them about Cass, awakening with Yulk and Nash standing over me, our oath, and that we were hoping to find answers at the end of the dungeon. Oh yeah, where's Nash? Nith asked. I've always heard of you two as a duo. He's been made the captain of the guard, Yulk said proudly. Nash Alta is the new guard captain of Nulava, Doston asked incredulously. Yes, well, the rumors surrounding my brother and I do not do us justice. Chief Gluhern couldn't find anyone else, could he? Just so, Yulk sighed, slightly deflated. Nash is a very capable orc, though, I said. He would probably struggle being a run-of-the-mill guard, but he'll shine as guard captain. He's tough, fair, and pretty good at training idiots. I would know. That's not a fair assessment of yourself, Nick, Yulk said. It's likely that he will consider you one of the best pupils he's ever trained. He'd never admit it, though. A small sort of sadness took hold deep within me, but I pushed it aside and chuckled. The sadness wasn't because I longed to hear Nash sing my praises or anything like that. It was because things were changing. With Nash becoming guard captain and Yulk being a professor, it was entirely possible that I would have to continue my journey alone. Part of me was bitter about it because they had sworn to help me. But I knew how immature that was. Like it or not, they had their own lives to live, and those lives didn't revolve around me. Plus, it was kind of cool to see them grow and become successful. If I had been told what they'd become when I first met them, I wouldn't have believed it. Well, actually, Nash getting married before Yulk did was certainly believable. Kirea had been glancing at Yulk with all the subtlety of a tank. As usual, though, he was completely oblivious. It wasn't that he was intentionally trying to ignore it or anything, he just genuinely didn't seem to notice. The rest of us, though, had already shared knowing glances. Poor girl. Or girls, actually. He'd kind of left a string of them, come to think of it. So let's say we make it to the end of the dungeon, Garin said. What's next for you three? No clue, I shrugged. It depends on what we find. What if we find a door that leads you home or something? Then, I guess I go home, but there's no way that it's going to be that easy. How do you know? Can't say. Bah, that's no fun. Indeed, Yulk said as he rose to his feet. Well, I, for one, am exhausted. Yeah, me too, Doston added, finishing his soup. We should rest while we can. After various murmurs of agreement, everyone except Larry tried to get some rest. My sleeping bag seemed to be magnetic, but it took some time for me to finally get to sleep. Even though the earlier fight had taken a lot out of me, the upcoming boss battle provided enough nerves to keep me up for a while. But once I managed to get to sleep, I was out like a light. I woke up to find Garin, Larry, and Yulk sitting together, chatting. I laid there, listening to Larry calmly explain what his father did to him. I couldn't even begin to imagine my own father doing something like that to anyone, let alone his own family. I tried, though, and my respect for Larry rose once I realized how angry I would have been at that sort of betrayal. It would have cursed me with the sort of anger that never would have burned out. I wouldn't have been able to trust anyone ever again. But that wasn't the case for Larry. He hadn't let it turn him into a monster. He could have easily eradicated the kobolds when he encountered them, but he hadn't. Actually, he had kind of civilized them, ensuring their longevity during his absence. Even with everyone's reactions towards him, he hadn't lashed out. Larry seemed to be peaceful through and through, which made it all the more upsetting that he was betrayed like that. I don't even know what to say, Garin muttered. That's terrible? Larry asked. Certainly. Lichdom is likely the most insidious curse to ever be crafted by the clutching claws of greedy mortals. Through my efforts to find a way to reverse it, I've come to the conclusion that it is a sick form of punishment for those who are arrogant enough to believe that they can escape the greatest equalizer. Equalizer? Death, I said as I joined them. The most powerful emperors, the scummiest of criminals, and everyone in between will all die one day. Oh, Garin thought for a moment, but not a lich, though. A lich can also die, Larry explained. Everything that is of this world can be ended. How do you kill a lich? Destroy all of their phylacteries, then their physical form. How many do you have? I am prevented from answering that question truthfully by the curse. A lich cannot kill itself, nor allow someone to kill them. Larry looked toward the ground. To quote Uragrana the Dark, a lich, as a foolish mortal that has forsaken death itself, must for all eternity shun its end. Even as it begs for death, it must claw at its unlife. I haven't heard of Uragrana, Yulk said. That's not surprising. She was one of the first mages to study immortality. Most of her writings were destroyed once her sins, which were many, were discovered. Yulk nodded slowly, tactfully refraining from asking what those sins were. I was curious, but figured it would probably be something similar to what Lari's father did. Or worse, even. Well, I'm glad to know the good in you, Lord Visamiro, Garin said, standing up. We should head out soon. I'm going to wake the others. I bit into some jerky as he began to shake everyone else awake. By the time they were eating breakfast, Yulk and I were already packing our things. Once everyone else had caught up with us, we disabled the shield and continued on our way. We came across a few more groups of drones, which were quickly dispatched thanks to Garin's hammer. Then we powered our way through a group of 5 robots. Occasionally, we would stop so that the orc adventurers could pick up something interesting that they might be able to sell. As we walked, the mirror-like corridor slowly began to widen, and the groups of enemies got bigger. The robots were much easier to handle with everyone at full strength, though. The most eventful part of the fighting was when a drone managed to avoid Yulk's electrical pulse spell and fire a light beam. The beam bounced off of the walls in an erratic pattern before hitting Garin in the shoulder. I popped it with my bullet spell before it could get another shot off. Correa healed Garin while I took care of the rest of the drones. After quite a few more groups of enemies, the ceiling began to rise as well. This actually came as a relief because the blinding effect of the mirrors lessened the further apart they got. After walking a bit further, we found ourselves in a massive room, the glints of our light barely visible in the distance. Well, this definitely looks like a boss chamber, Garin said. Let's see if we can find... The floor shuddered as the screech of metal cut him off. Chapter 117. Nick Smith. Adventurer level 11. Human American. We stared in shock as a huge, shadowy figure began to stand, its joints screeching with the effort. Then it began to approach us, sending shudders through the floor with each step. It took a lot to fight the animalistic urge to run. Finally, it stepped into the glow of our lights, and I realized that it looked almost exactly like the robots we had been fighting, only much larger. "Fuck, that's big," Garin muttered. "That's what she said," Nifth replied with a grin, receiving a few groans in reply. It was at least 3 times my height and twice as wide as I am at the shoulders. Its left arm ended in a blade, and its right arm ended in a hammer, just like the other robots. The biggest difference other than size was its face. Just like the other robots, its face was engraved into its metallic head. Unlike the other robots, its eyes were glowing with a teal light. "I guess it fires its ranged attack from its eyes," I said. "Look closer," Yulk advised. In response to my confused expression, he gestured toward the boss as it came to a halt about a dozen feet away. I took a better look and noticed that the center of its hammer and also had a teal glow. That meant it could probably fire in at least two directions at once, unless the beams converged or something. I also noted that the glows were more than double the size of the ones we'd seen on the drones. "Shit," I grumbled. "Does it have any weak points that I can aim for?" "Well, the limbs can't function if they're not connected to the body, so the joints would be a good bet," Yulk said. "Right." I gave Yulk a blank stare and turned my attention inward. "Any ideas?" "A penetrative shot to the power supply would disable it," Ten replied. "Probably." "Probably?" "Well, it could have redundant power supplies or backup batteries. It is worth noting, however, that some power supplies explode when punctured. So instead of two giant laser beams, we'd have to worry about a bomb." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "The explosion wouldn't be that big. We would be safe at this distance, probably." "I guess that's a risk we can take then." "Where is its power supply located?" "Nick," Ten simulated a sigh. "If I knew where its power supply was, I would know if it had redundant ones. I would also know what kind of power supply it is and whether or not it would explode." "Fuck," I mumbled aloud angrily. "Okay, fine." "Best guess, center mass, where the armor is thickest. Installing a power supply in an extremity would be pretty dumb. But who knows? Maybe a fool managed to get into robotics." "Doston, let us know when you're ready to cast," Garen said. "Kiria, stick close to me and get ready to dodge if the initial volley doesn't kill it. Nith, aim for the eyes." "That was the plan," Nith chuckled. "Gonna be using a skill-caused penetrative shot, which will slow my rate of fire." "Yeah, that's fine. Normal arrows would probably ding right off the fucker." "Are you folks ready?" Garen asked, turning to me. Yulk and Larry nodded. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. A somewhat stupid idea had occurred to me, and I was preemptively dreading the consequences. "Yeah, we're ready when you are," I said. "We'll launch our attacks once Doston and Nith do." Doston, Yulk, and Larry raised a hand toward the boss. I raised both of my hands with my index fingers pointed toward the massive chest. I already knew that I could cast two bullets at once, but two steel bullets was unexplored territory. I steadied my hands, hoping that I had enough magic to pull this off. The boss stared at us while remaining unnervingly still, like it was frozen in time. A moment later, I heard an unintelligible mutter come from Doston and triggered my spell. "Telub Leetsak," I shouted. The mixed magic in my core flowed through both of my arms and into my index fingers. At the tips of my fingers, two round chunks of steel formed and launched fast enough to make a sonic boom. It was hard to tell which hit first, my bullets or the three lightning spells. Electricity arced between the boss's limbs and two holes appeared in its upper chest as the spells struck their target. Its eyes had already begun to dim when Nith's arrow struck. The arrow went deep, and it kind of looked like the boss's left eye had been replaced by feathers. A tsunami of exhaustion slammed into me, but I began to take deep, purposeful breaths and managed to keep my footing. The boss, however, collapsed to its knees, sending a shockwave through the floor that nearly caused me to topple over. My footing held firm, though, and my breathing slowly recharged my magic core as the boss's head bowed. We did it?" Doston asked. "Yes," Garen shouted, pumping his fist. "That's how it's done." "Awesome work, everyone." The tingling sensation in my body began to recede, and I expected to feel relieved. But the anxious knot that had formed in my gut didn't fade. I closed my eyes and shook my head to clear the cobwebs. But it was the sound of screeching metal that got rid of the fuzzy feeling behind my eyes and replaced it with fear. "Get down," I shouted. I threw myself to the right as a beam of light filled the space I had just been standing in. The boss had raised its head, and its eye was glowing brighter than ever. My impact with the ground knocked the breath out of me, but I forced air into my lungs and tried to stand. More screeching tore at my ears as the boss rose to its feet. It started to raise the glowing portion of its hammer toward me, but 3 more bolts of lightning struck it. It froze for a moment, which was all the time I needed to get back to my feet. I checked my cooldowns and was relieved to find that my dodge was successful due to luck rather than my skills. But my magic core hadn't recovered enough for another steel bullet, and the boss was very much focused on me. Why, though? If it were me, I'd prioritize the enemy that had done the most damage. But Nifth's arrow had destroyed one of its eyes. Unless... Another terrible idea occurred to me. "Keep hitting it," I shouted and began sprinting toward the boss. "Are you insane?" Garen shouted toward my back. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," Ten said. "We've got a better chance close up to it than we do at a distance," I replied, sliding between the boss's legs. As I had hoped, the boss tracked my movements and turned away from the rest of the party. "A better chance at what? Your sword isn't going to do anything to it, and don't you dare punch it." "A better chance of avoiding attacks while I wait for my magic to recharge." I ducked, and the boss's blade whooshed over my head. "I see," Ten said hesitantly. "Carry on." I leapt to my left as the hammer came down, slamming into the ground where I had just been standing. The boss wasn't all that fast, but there was no doubt in my mind that even a single glancing blow would probably be fatal. I kept control of my breathing, regenerating my magic with each breath. As I dodged the sword again, I caught a glimpse of Correa holding on to Garen, who was trying to rush to my side. His hammer would certainly be more effective than my sword, but the goal was to distract rather than destroy. If I could keep the boss busy until... The hammer struck the floor again, and a chunk of rock struck me in the head. My only warning was the sudden appearance of Ares, my helmet, which rang like a bell at the impact. I fell to one knee and tried to roll out of the way, but ended up on my back. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the boss's sword rise. I wanted to roll out of the way, but my body couldn't hear me over the sound of my head ringing. Just before the sword came down and ended me, 3 more lightning bolts and an arrow struck the boss in the back. The massive motherfucker froze again, but its eyes didn't dim like they had the first time. It did begin to smoke, though. I scrambled to my feet and leapt back. A fraction of a second later, the giant blade smashed into the ground where I had been laying. The boss pulled its blade from the ground and stepped toward me. "I think you were right," I told Ten as I dodged another swing of the hammer. "I know," it replied. "It's good to hear you acknowledge that this was a dumb idea, though. It suggests that you might be able to learn to listen to me if we survive." "You didn't actually say that this was a dumb idea, and I meant about the power supply. I think it has more than one. I have come to a similar conclusion." I ducked as the humongous robot attempted to bisect me again. "So where's the other one, then?" I asked impatiently. "How do you know that I magically formulated detailed schematics of the boss out of nowhere?" "That's sarcasm. I still don't know, Nick." Another arrow struck the boss, traveling straight through its shoulder. The hammer still rose, though. "Guess, please," I said as I rolled out of the way. "Fine. Given the fact that your spells hit the upper torso, and it would be stupid to put a secondary power supply in an extremity, I would hypothesize that the secondary power supply is in the lower torso." 3 more lightning bolts connected with the boss, and I took the reprieve to gain a bit of distance so that I could focus on gathering my magic. The faint white smoke that had been trickling out of the gaps in its body had turned a few shades darker. It was taking damage, but not fast enough. By the time the boss started moving again, I had slightly more than enough magic for another shot. "God, I wish I had a fucking rocket launcher," I muttered as I aimed. "Teller Blitzzack." The chunk of steel struck the lower portion of the boss's torso as it was taking another step. Its foot hung in the air as its eyes began to dim, and I came to the horrifying realization that I was between it and the ground. With all of my might, I leapt to the side as it came tumbling down. I hit the ground twice because the impact of the boss lifted me into the air a bit. My cuirass took the blunt of the impacts, but it was still enough to force the air out of my lungs. But I scrambled to my feet anyway. The big-ass bot had left a small impact crater where it had fallen. The only movement from it was the black smoke that poured from its new holes and gently drifted up into the darkness. Even if the boss were somehow still functional, it was doubtful that it would be able to get up again. Then the adrenaline wore off, and it was my turn to fall. The pain of my knees hitting the stone floor was probably the only thing that kept my eyes open. Then a bony hand gently grabbed my shoulder. I was so tired that I didn't even jump at the sudden contact. Leach ronim tsak, Lari said. The exhaustion grew more pronounced as my various aches and pains began to dissipate. Damn it, I really wish he had said something first, Ten complained. I was barely able to adjust to account for the magical healing. Yeah, I replied. Is there anything you can do about the exhaustion? No, your fatigue is caused by exertion, not injury. I could keep you from falling asleep, but that wouldn't stop you from feeling tired. Damn. Oh well, at least we beat the boss. Yes, thankfully the engineer that designed it was at least competent. I am curious about the power supplies, but I doubt they're intact enough for any sort of analysis. That was amazing, you fucking idiot, Garin said as he ran up. Why'd you run off on your own like that? He forgets that there are others that are just as competent as he is, Yulk chuckled as he walked over. Though I doubt your hammer would have been all that much help, given the situation. The B-boss was focusing on me because my first spell hit its P primary power supply, I explained, struggling to speak. I got close so that it couldn't fire its B-beam weapon. Then I just had to buy enough time to recharge my magic and for figure out where its other power supply was. Well, okay, but I could have helped with that, Garin argued. I looked up at the hammer-holding orc with a devilish grin. I didn't say you couldn't, you know. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, completely dumbfounded. Doston, Nifth, and Yulk chuckled a little. I stopped you because you'd have gotten splattered, Kiria said sternly. That thing's hammer was way bigger than yours. Nifth laughed. That's what Shut the fuck up, Kiria interrupted with a scowl. Yes, ma'am. Well, I can't exactly argue with results, I guess, Garin said with a sigh, and I can't be mad that you were concerned for my well-being, Kiria. Some faith in my abilities would be nice in the future, though. Well, when you get some, we can build a shrine or something, Doston grinned. Hey! So what do we do now? I interrupted. I don't think I can make it much further without resting first. That's just as well, Garin said. It would be a waste not to explore the room for treasure and dismantle the boss for loot. It should be safe to take our time, too. Safe? What do you mean? We beat all the enemies in this section of the dungeon, and the ones further in aren't going to come this far back. Why not? I don't know, they just never do, he shrugged. Some people hypothesize that the monsters are hostile to each other, and the bosses act as deterrents that keep each monster in its section, Yulk added. It isn't a terrible explanation, but gathering enough evidence to prove it is obviously impossible. One would have to sneak past one of the bosses, kidnap a monster from further in the dungeon, and then return to the boss with the monster in tow. Yeah, I don't think there are any bosses that you can actually sneak past, Nifth chuckled. Not that you'd want to. The risk of someone else running into the boss while you're trying to kidnap a monster would be too high. You'd lose out on the loot. I see, I said groggily. Okay, well, if you're sure we're safe, I'm going to rest. I think I need a pretty long nap. You can do whatever you want with the boss. Carving up the boss will be pretty noisy, I think, Garin laughed. We'll start with the exploration so you can get some sleep. Sounds good, Nifth said, offering me a hand. He helped me to my feet, and despite the fact that it felt like I was moving through molasses, I helped set up camp. I forced myself to eat a stick of jerky before laying down. Garin and the other three readied themselves and set off just as my eyes began to close. With a sigh of relief and a sense of accomplishment, I drifted off to sleep. Chapter 118 Emperor Jack Norev I Adventurer Level N.A. Dwarf Calcutin. What gibberish spouts from your incompetent maw? I demanded. The demons, my emperor, my new senior aide stammered. They are attacking. All over the empire. Repeating yourself provides no additional clarification, boy. Do you believe that my ears no longer function? I'm sore. Silence, I shouted as I angrily rose from my throne. Your apologies mean as much as the mud on a Hnas's hoof. The next words out of your mouth had better detail from whence these attacks are coming and how many demons are involved, or I'll have you flayed, fired, and kicked out on what's left of your fucking incompetent ass. Language, Cloud Dweller, Siri scolded me. I turned to stare at my wife with pursed lips and a squint. Had such a correction been issued by anyone other than her, their head easily could have been mounted on the wall of shame within the hour. Luckily for my darling, my love for her was deeper than any rage I could ever feel. Plus, it would be pretty scandalous for me to have my wife executed. I definitely wouldn't be the first emperor to do so, though. So it was mostly my love that allowed her to be so fucking cheeky. The corners of her perfectly shaped lips rose a little, as if she knew what I was thinking and how much our love tied my hands. Not in front of the help, dear, I grumbled, especially when they're being an imbecile. I turned back toward the aide, who was on both knees in apology. The news of the demons had obviously shaken him, and he had dropped everything to report it to me. A normal reaction when one thinks it through. I sighed as I came to the realization that my previous aide, Hanamsh, had set my expectations a little high. "Do you know where the demons are attacking from, or how many there are?" I asked with as much patience as I could muster. The shake of his head very nearly sent me into another shouting spree, but I remembered what I had told him and took a breath to calm down. "Then go find out. Or better yet, summon someone who does." The aide first rose to one knee whilst keeping his head bowed, a silent acknowledgement of my command, and then proceeded to flee the throne room at top speed. The large doors creaked closed behind him as I grumpily retook my seat and glanced at my wife. She gave me a small nod of approval. Despite the amateurish manner in which it was delivered, the news is still quite concerning, no? She asked. Any news of an attack is concerning when one isn't given any details, I replied with salt in my tone. Yet you don't sound overly concerned, my dear Emperor. I've spent the better part of my rule devising strategies against invasion. Our friendships with Bolisir and the unified chiefdoms, for instance, were neither accidental nor incidental. Those relationships, as well as the ones with the rest of our neighbors, were practically clawed into existence to ensure that we had allies to call upon. Then why would you aggravate High Chief Ulamak about the mine? Because I knew I could get away with it, I grinned at her. Ulamak is notoriously level-headed, so trying to piss him off just sport. Plus, we need the income from the mine to avoid the coming financial crisis. So a mixture of urgency and immaturity. I suspect many historians will describe the majority of my rule as such. But there is a method to each madness, an intent behind each jest. The cleverest among them will see that. Ah, I see. She rose from her cushion and approached me. So you're the greatest emperor to ever grace the throne with your behind. Of course, my darling, I replied as her lips met my forehead. It is the duty of every emperor to be greater than those that came before. Then you'll have no trouble defeating these demons then. She giggled as she deftly dodged my kiss and returned to her cushion. I wasn't allowed to kiss her in the throne room, lest I stroke her passions and she lose control of herself. She was terribly afraid of someone walking in on the inevitable consequences of such. No, the duty of defeating the demons lies solely with dear cousin Jakiv. I sighed as I watched her plop onto the cushion. He is the face of our martial forces, and my intervention would be disruptive. So this will be yet another feather in Jakiv's cap, she asked with an edge to her tone. Let him wear a clucker for all I care. He is competent and knows his duty. Doubting his intentions is an exercise in futility, my love. Oh, he's that loyal to you, is he? Amsiri had a habit of pushing my boundaries whenever she became nervous, as if fighting me was a suitable replacement for fighting the causes of her anxiety. I adopted a more relaxed posture in the hopes of setting her at ease. His loyalty to me is irrelevant, I chuckled. Cousin Jakiv is loyal to the people. So long as the throne and whoever's ass is upon it provides more benefit than harm to the people of the empire, Jakiv and those that follow him will toe the line. And I prefer it that way, as a matter of fact. It keeps me honest. For the most part, she chuckled in turn. Indeed, I winked. The creak of the doors warned me to change my posture, which was the exact reason that I never allowed the hinges to be greased. Jakiv and the new aide rushed up the purple, green, and gold runner rug toward me. I leaned forward on my throne as they kneeled. My emperor, may I pray— Silence, I interrupted. I know my cousin, aide. Have you anything to add to this conversation? The aide shook his head. It pleased me that he wasn't so stupid as to speak once ordered into silence. Knowing that a lengthy war was likely in front of me, I decided to give him another chance. Then leave and reflect on your errors this day. See to it that they are never repeated. There was a small thud as the aide's head touched the floor in gratitude for my forgiveness. Jakiv raised an eyebrow as the boy rose and fled the room with a speed that would make a messenger envious. "My dearest cousin Jakiv," I said, smiling and standing, "I take it you're here about the demons." "Yes, Emperor." "Please stow the formalities, cousin. I want to know everything, and I'd rather not have every sentence ending in the acknowledgement of my station." "Yes." Okay." Only family and friends that I held in high esteem were allowed to speak to me informally. Only with permission, of course. It was always amusing to see Jakiv try to adjust to speaking in an informal manner. I was almost convinced that he would speak formally even on a drinking binge, were he to participate in such an activity. "Sibit said that you needed to be briefed on the threat," he asked, still kneeling. "Get up, damn it," I sighed and sat. "And who's Sibit?" "The aide, dear," my wife interjected. "Oh, right. You don't know your senior aide's name?" Jakiv asked. "I've learned it, but it keeps escaping me." "He's no Hanamsh. My previous senior aide had held the office since my father's time on the throne. We had butted heads for a while after my coronation, but his professionalism had never allowed him to cross the line into insubordination. He challenged my more whimsical and childish decisions, but did so in a respectful and professional way. The bastard was so good at his job, in fact, that it created a deep respect for him within me, and I had even occasionally sought his advice. Furthermore, his work ethic was the stuff of legends. He worked longer than anyone else, including me, and he didn't marry or have any children specifically so that he could better serve the empire. Hanamsh even refused retirement once his age began to catch up to him. The councillors tried to force the issue under the misguided belief that the role would better be served by someone younger, but I interceded on his behalf with an imperial decree. I could tell he still had some oil left to burn, and leaving it unburned would haunt him for the rest of his days. Plus, I'd grown quite fond of him by that time. The decree bought us another decade, and we made the most of it. But then his age took his sight, and there was nothing left that could be done. I granted him a few caretakers and some land, then sent him on his way. It was a sadder day for me than my own father's funeral. "She," Jakiv said, immediately snapping me out of my melancholic thoughts. "She?" I asked. "Sibit is a woman, cousin. She just cuts her hair short and has a slightly deeper than normal voice." "Really?" "You truly didn't notice?" Amsiri asked in shock. "The only woman I notice is you, my dear." I smiled and winked at her, then turned my attention back to Jakiv. "No matter. What of the demons? They're attacking multiple territories at once, in every direction with the exception of the east. The messengers report that the attacks were sudden, as if the armies just appeared from nowhere." "Interplanetary travel," I nodded. "Damn, so this is a full-blown demonic invasion then, just like in the history books. Numbers?" "Our forces were caught completely by surprise and did not have a chance to estimate their strength. We've lost 2 cities to the north and west, and 1 to the south. Haldabro held up, though. Refugees and surviving soldiers are currently in the process of fleeing the demonic armies. 5 cities have fallen, and I'm only just now hearing of this. Only a few moments after myself. The demons attacked by surprise and in unison. This was not the work of a mindless horde, it was a well-planned and executed operation." "I see. How long ago did these attacks begin?" "A week ago, at most." "And what are we doing about them?" "Word has been sent to the next most likely targets, and I've begun the muster. General Sov will lead a force to the south, General Hilter will go north, and I will lead our main army to the west. We'll pick up the surviving soldiers along the way and send the refugees to safety. 10,000 soldiers will remain in the capital under your direct command for defense. I've also sent word to our allies, but I didn't request aid." "Why not?" I asked, confusion seeping into my voice. "With how well these attacks were coordinated, I am of the mind that our enemy is a strategist." Jakiv explained. "They knew where and when to strike, which means that they likely know other things about us as well." so I find it quite suspicious that we were not attacked in the east. Ah, I see. It's almost as if they're begging us to invite the orcs over to play, presumably so that they can then attack the orcs whilst their defenses are weakened. What of Bolisir? If it were me, I would strike Bolisir in a mirrored fashion. If the both of us ask the orcs for aid, the orcs' armies would be split in half, making all three potential fights much easier for the daemons. And you are confident that we do not need the help? No, but I'd rather wait for it to be offered if it pleases you. Not only will it benefit us diplomatically, but it will answer the question of whether or not I'm correct in what the enemy is planning. Ah, I see. If the chiefdoms offer aid and Bolisir doesn't, then you're right. If neither or both offer aid, then you're wrong. Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking. And what of our coffers? That isn't my area of expertise, but the treasurer told me that we still have some excess funds from the Night Kingdom invasion that we can apply toward this conflict. Supply lines shouldn't be a problem either, so long as we can keep greedy fingers out of the caravans. Fat chance of that, I grumbled. Is it not treason to steal from an imperial caravan? My wife asked, especially during a time of conflict. No, just high theft. My father declared it treason during his reign, and the bureaucrats became overly cautious so as not to lose their heads. The fear of being branded a traitorous thief caused them to double and triple check every little requisition and transport, and whilst they were doing so, our soldiers were forced to raise the countryside for food to eat. I was under the impression that they do that regardless. This was a defensive conflict, my dear, and our soldiers were ransacking our own villages. Oh. His soldiers robbing the peasantry certainly didn't help my father's popularity, I sighed. Though I loathed the idea of greedy bastards stealing food from the mouths of those who are putting everything on the line for our defense, I've sworn not to repeat my father's mistakes. Quite commendable, Amsiri smirked. Back on topic, how are we for equipment? I asked, rolling my eyes at my wife. She stuck her tongue out in reply. We have more than enough, Jakiv said. The armourer has been using his portion of the budget to keep the smiths busy so that they don't lose their skills. We can likely give everyone in the capital a spear and dagger. I see. Very well, cousin, you may be on your way. Happy hunting. Thank you, my emperor. Jakiv bowed and turned to leave. Oh, and send Sybil in. Sibbit, sire. Yes, yes, I sighed, waving him away. Jakiv exited the throne room, and a few moments later, Sibbit entered. She hurriedly walked up the carpet runner and knelt, head bowed. I examined her for a moment and began to feel foolish once I noticed the signs of her femininity. The matter of the demonic invasion will soon be dealt with, I said. General Jakiv brought a lesser matter to my attention, though. Is it true that you are a woman? If I didn't know any better, I could have sworn that I heard her swear under her breath. Yes, your greatness, she replied. And how many times have I called you boy since you took office? I waited patiently while she gathered the courage to answer. Several, sire, she stammered. Why then did you not correct me? Do you believe me to be above reproach? Or was it your intention to hide your sex from me? I wasn't. Bah, consider those questions rhetorical. I waved my hand dismissively. I imagined that you were intimidated by my harsh mannerisms, and as such were too nervous to correct me. Am I correct? Yes, sire. Then we have found ourselves a rare learning moment. One that will cost no lives, I smiled cruelly. You see, Sibbit, by being too afraid to correct me, you have allowed me to be embarrassed in front of my favorite cousin. Of course, there was no harm to anything except my ego, but imagine if it had been a diplomat or a foreign ruler. They would assume that I am blind to the goings-on in my own damned castle, and they would act accordingly. My booming shout echoed through the throne room. A quick glance at Amsiri showed that she had shifted her expression to a colder one, providing some additional severity to my words. A wonderful woman. You've made quite a few critical errors this day, Sibbit, I said after a moment of silence. Yes, Emperor, she said. Steel had gathered in her tone, which provided a bit of clarification for me. She was taking ownership of her failures, and though these failures obviously embarrassed her, she had solidified her resolve in preparation for whatever punishment I would issue, which meant there was yet hope for her. A senior aide who cannot keep their calm in the face of an emergency and who is too afraid to correct me when I'm wrong will lead us to ruin, I continued. Reporting an issue without obtaining all of the facts of the matter can lead to misunderstandings. And if you are too afraid to correct those misunderstandings, I trailed off and let her imagination do the work for me. I understand, Your Grace, she said after a moment. Good. The Empire has no use for a senior aide who's a coward, I replied coldly. I am giving you 5 days of paid leave. Use as many of them as you need to grow a fucking spine. If you cannot overcome your cowardice by the end of your leave, don't bother returning. Her eyes finally raised from the floor and regarded me with confusion, but I refused to elaborate. Go. Yes, Your Highness, she said. I watched as she stood and quickly walked out of the throne room. Once the doors finished creaking, Amsiri cleared her throat. Has my beloved Empire taken a shine to the aide that he just found out is a woman? She asked in jest. No, my dear, I sighed, then chuckled. I've fired too many aides, and the councillors are growing impatient. If I'm not cautious, I'll have to take their heads to prevent them from trying to remove my ability to select my assistants. This will, of course, lead to even more conflict. There's plenty of bloodshed on the horizon, no need to invite more. So you're hoping that she quits? I'm hoping she gets her head out of her ass. Either she has what it takes to be a senior aide worthy of respect, or she doesn't. Some time to reflect will show her whichever happens to be the case. I see. Boo dash. Whatever my wife was about to say was interrupted by the creaking of the doors. Sibbet strolled into the room, holding a piece of parchment. I stared at her, dumbfounded, as she knelt before me again. Your Highness, Bolisir sends word that they have been attacked by a demonic army, she said. The message was delivered by a wilder at the behest of King Isinirath. They are not requesting aid, nor are they offering it. We sent them back with word of what has happened here, and asked that they inform the unified chiefdoms, since they are faster than our own messengers. We've sent interceptors to retrieve our messengers. I see, I said. Did I not just place you on leave, Sybil? Sibbet, Your Highness, and I took all the leave that I needed to take, she said as she looked up at me. As you ordered, sire. I held eye contact with her and grinned. Good. Tell me about the attacks. Chapter 119. Isinirath. Adventurer level NA. High Dragon, unknown. My jaws clacked shut and the smell of smouldering flesh seared my nostrils. As my whore peeled back from my eyes, I took a moment to admire my work. Small flames burned in the midst of a massive scorch mark, which had replaced a rather large cluster of demons. The ground shook as I landed, and a group of wilder and elves who had been about to fight the former demons stared in disbelief. Other skirmishes were happening nearby, but there was no doubt that the demons would soon rout. I had just destroyed a significant portion of their force with a single breath after all. Your Majesty! Oakmore shouted from behind me. I turned my head enough to regard him with a single eye. It was an expression of disdain, though the meaning seemed to have been lost to time. The regent was either completely unaware of the intent behind such a glance, or he was frustratingly thorough in ignoring it. You cannot be on the front lines, Your Highness, he practically screamed as he marched up to me. Far. It is where I am most effective. I waved a wing dismissively. With respect, sire, no, it absolutely isn't, the elf growled. I turned further to regard him with both eyes. By far and large, I had been disregarding Oakmore's advice, occasionally in a disparaging manner. He knew more of these modern times than I, and that did not sit well with me. Yet this marked the first time that he had lost his temper. Despite the slight flare in my own temper, I found it to be a refreshing change of pace. Explain, I demanded. I have, he replied. I am paying attention this time. Yes, Your Majesty. We are capable of fighting the demons without your assistance. You are the ruler of these lands and do not have an heir. Meanwhile, all of us are either replaceable or immortal. And, if you were to be wounded or worse, it would irreparably shatter morale. The demons are intelligent enough to know this. So your presence on the battlefield means that the demons no longer have to defeat all of us to claim victory, they simply have to defeat you, sire. Oh? And which of those tasks do you suppose would be more difficult? I asked sarcastically. 1,000 arrows aimed at 1,000 targets will miss far more often than 1,000 arrows aimed at one target, Your Majesty, especially when one considers the relative size of the targets in question. I huffed a little, upset at and resentful of the wisdom in his words. The damned elf was right, of course. However, there were several unbusy soldiers gawking in our direction. It wasn't as if I could simply concede his point. Arrows, even in the thousands, have little impact on one such as I argued, then decided to change the subject a little before he could point out that the demons had things far deadlier than arrows. What do you know of our foe, anyway? I have studied the history of the demonic invasion and the angelic suppression extensively, my lord, he replied. So extensively, in fact, that I know that demons have weapons that are far da. Then you should be aware that these foes that I've just obliterated will return in short order, I interrupted hastily. Elves and fae make for fine soldiers, but your tools only harm the flesh, and demons are made of more than measly meat. They will return over and over and over, wearing you down until you cannot fight any longer. Then, if they don't kill you, they'll make you their plaything. So you should take every respite that I grant you, however brief, with grace and gratitude. Oakmore stared at me with a stoic expression, then whistled and gestured at a nearby fae. I narrowed my eyes at my borderline insubordinate servant as the fae skipped over to us. I was on the verge of chiding Oakmore, but the weapon that the wilder was holding caught my eye. It was a spear with a multicolored crystalline head. While it was true that the wilder had mostly avoided the prior conflict with the demons, I had heard that those that partook had used weapons of bone, blood, wood, or bronze. Seeing a fae holding a weapon made of crystal was odd, to say the least. As it turns out, Your Majesty, our wilder allies are just as informed as you and I, Oakmore said with a subtly smug tone. Their weapons are specially designed to wound the essence of a demon. How? I demanded. Oakmore and I stared at the fae, who looked between us a few times before realizing that I was addressing it. Oh, me? Well, The fae stopped speaking and thought for a moment. Demons are made of, like, magic. Kind of like we are, but in a more intense way. And also not really. It's really hard to explain this kind of thing, Your Highness, so please forgive me if it turns out I get it wrong. Demons and wilder are made of magic? I asked incredulously. Well, no. But yes, it's not like normal magic, it's more like a type of thing that has similar attributes to magic, but it can't be manipulated in the same way that magic can. Or, I guess it can, but only by things made of that stuff. So demons and wilder are made of stuff which can be manipulated by demons and wilder exclusively. Ah, no, not exclusively. Like, this crystal can manipulate demon stuff because it's also a physical manifestation of that stuff. When their flesh is destroyed by this crystal, it causes a portion of the stuff that they've gathered to dissipate. Gathered? Yeah, that's how demons become more powerful. They beat each other up and take the stuff from one another. Oh, and the annuals too. They can take this stuff you speak of from annuals as well. Yes, Your Majesty, the fae nodded solemnly. Annuals and demons are pretty much the same thing, but they thrive in different ways. Demons need to cause pain to feel contentment. Annuals need to cause pleasure to feel contentment. It's probably way more complicated than that, but that's what I've learned about 'em. And this crystal of yours destroys the demons by dissipating the stuff that they've stolen from other similar entities. No, Your Majesty, demons and annuals cannot be completely destroyed. They can only be weakened to the point of irrelevance. These crystals will cause that to happen for most of the rank-and-file demons, but it will have barely any impact on a very strong demon. It just can't dissipate enough stuff. I see. The wilder truly were terrifying creatures. They present themselves as ignorant, bumbling fools, yet they were completely capable of horrifyingly creative acts of violence. I wondered if they had discovered the crystal's properties, or if they had specially created it for the sole purpose of killing ethereal beings. Oakmore's expression became ever so slightly smugger. A younger version of myself would have roared in his face, simply to replace that arrogance with the terror that he should be feeling. Yet even though I had spent most of it in a state of slumber, Time had matured me. I couldn't help but feel a little proud of myself for resisting the urge to damage the elf's ears. As you've no doubt been able to deduce by now, Your Majesty, you are not needed on the battlefield to secure our victory, Oakmore said. And what shall I do instead, elf? I demanded haughtily. Shall I return to a populated area and allow your fellows to fill my belly with meats and wine, while my people, those who I am tasked with protecting, struggle to survive against the demonic invasion? Shall I grow fat and slovenly whilst shirking my duties simply because I have no heir and my safety happens to be at risk, never minding the fact that everyone's safety is at risk? Well, no. And what relevance is it that I have no heir anyway? This nation and its people have survived thus far without my guidance. Even if I were to perish whilst doing my duty, Bolisir would live on. Not to insert myself into a conversation in which I am unwelcome, Your Majesty. But I must argue against that, the Fae interjected. Both your people and my own consider your existence to be inspiring, and your awakening has marked the beginning of what many believe will be a golden age of prosperity and peace. Excepting the demonic shenanigans, of course. He's right, sire, Oakmore added. We can certainly self-govern, but a mortal is a mortal. At the end of the day, whomever takes it upon themselves to try to fill your role will be found wanting simply because they are just like everyone else. And it isn't as if we can simply let the Wilder take the reins either. Mortals always suffer under the rule of the Wilder, because they simply can't understand all of the issues that we face. That's right, the Fae shrugged with a sad frown. Even those of us who actively study mortals with a genuine, passionate curiosity find them to be quite mysterious. There are so many risky activities that they take part in, like smoking, drinking, overeating, fighting, betrayal, and many others that they should be avoiding with every fiber of their being. You see, sire, we also participate in these activities, but for mortals, there are dire and permanent consequences. If that were the case for us, we simply would not partake in those activities. If we ruled the mortals, we would try to save them from the consequences of their actions by penalizing those activities. And then what would happen? Immediate rebellion, I chuckled, then sighed. So to sum up your rather lengthy arguments, I shouldn't be on the battlefield because people are inspired by my ilk, more so than they could be inspired by their own. That's a pretty wee. It's not just that, Your Majesty, Oakmore interrupted. Your existence has been a cornerstone of this nation for several generations. Your death would be shattering to morale, especially if it came at the hands of the demons. If they can kill you, Your Highness, then they can kill anyone. I had been hoping that he wouldn't bring that up. The death of my parents had brought an intense melancholy unto the people of Bolisir. Even the Wilder hadn't been immune. I justified seeking my selfish revenge by reasoning that a victory would lift everyone's spirits. My parents' advisors, who had just become my advisors, knew that my reasoning was absurd. The pain they felt at the loss of my parents had broken them, though, and they didn't try very hard to stop me. Whilst my victory had indeed raised everyone's spirits, it was an intense fight, and if I had been any older, I'd likely have lost. Thankfully for myself and my people, I had been young enough to consider simply eating my foe. And that victory had taken me out of the rest of the war, too. Fine, I acknowledge your concerns, I admitted, yet you have failed to acknowledge mine. What am I to do, if not fight? Well, the elf trailed off, desperately trying to think of a task for me. I got an idea, the Fae said with a grin. We've got fairies scouting the battlefield from the air. Oakmore and I stared at the Fae with a measure of incredulity. Are you suggesting that I join the fairies? I asked in disbelief. No, sire. You are able to fly way higher and see way better than they can. You can pop up, take a look at what the demons are doing, then come back down and give orders. That would still put him at risk, Oakmore argued. Nah, he can fly higher than their weapons can reach and still see what they're doing. It isn't as if they're going to try to join him in the air either. Demons hate flying. You could even say... The Fae began to laugh and struggled to compose itself. You could even say that they think it's beneath them. Oakmore and I groaned at the pun, which made the Fae laugh even harder. We waited patiently for the laughing fit to subside, but it only grew worse and worse each time the Fae looked at us. Before long, it was rolling on the ground. "Fine," I said, losing my patience and spreading my wings. "I shall consign myself to scouting and the occasional attack." Oakmore's mouth opened to protest, but the roar of wind propelled by my wings silenced him, and hopefully threw a bunch of dust and dirt into his stupid little mouth. I lifted off, and a warmth grew in my chest as I climbed higher and higher. A gnome, likely long dead, had been the one to tell me of magic cores. He claimed that both dragons and high dragons were far too large to fly in the same manner as a bird. Well, the original word he used was heavy, but he quickly changed his phrasing under the weight of my mother's cold stare. Once he had pointed it out, though, I began to feel it every time I took flight or spewed flames. Instinctive spell casting, he had said it was. I had wondered if I could learn other spells, but deemed it unnecessary at the time. Teeth, claws, wings, fire, brawn, and brains. Why would I need more weapons than what I already had? Then the demons invaded, and I realized somewhat too late that my weapons were not quite enough. I had tried to learn spells as fast as I could. There were two discoveries that myself and my tutors made rather quickly. The first was that I could cast spells without speech. The second was that my mental images had to be far more precise than what would be expected from a Mer. True Sight was easy for me to learn. Wind Slash was much more difficult. And before I could obtain a worthy arsenal of spells, Hirgarus killed my parents. As I soared above the forest and its various clearings, it occurred to me that I could continue to attempt to learn new spells. Or perhaps I should try to find a surviving high dragon and negotiate a mating bond. Maybe I could even accomplish both feats, though I'd likely have to wait until the demons were dealt with. Magic coursed through my wings, and I reached a good altitude. Just as the Fae claimed, my normal eyesight was good enough to see most of what was happening. I cast True Sight to make certain that I wasn't missing anything, and noted a worthy target. With a grin, I prepared to dive. Chapter 119.5, Bilia the Keen. Adventurer level, NA. Demon, unknowable. The strange spear made a pleasant squelch as I ripped it from my abdomen. The Fae that had put it there gasped for air and clawed at the foot that I had pressed upon its chest. I examined the crystalline spearhead, disgusted by the resonance that I felt with it. It felt like an anneal, and I knew instinctively that if it had interrupted my connection to the flesh, a significant part of my being would have been rent asunder. And how did measly dimension hoppers come up with these then? I asked. It was, of course, a rhetorical question. The Fae beneath my heel could not take in enough air to reply, and I didn't particularly care about the details. It still tried to mutter something, but I only laughed in response. My laugh died in my throat when I realized some of the implications, though. "He couldn't have known, right?" I whispered, glancing at my troops as they began to reform our ranks. "We were all oath-breakers, bound to this invasion only by the promise of pleasures the likes of which we could not find elsewhere." Such was the case for most, if not all, of the demons who took part in the invasion of Bolicea. Due to our nature, it hadn't even seemed suspicious that Marquess Naberius would want us separated from the rest of his forces. It couldn't be possible that he knew of these weapons. A demon would not be able to fool the wild sight, so his spies could not get close enough to the wilder to learn of these weapons. But if he knew, it would make complete sense for him to send oathbreakers to Bolicea instead of his loyal soldiers. Initial reports failed to mention these weapons, though, so it wasn't likely that they were in use elsewhere, and Bolicea was the only invasion point where we were even expected to encounter the wielder. But how could he have known? A sickening lump grew in the back of my throat, and I savored it. I didn't get to inhabit flesh all that often, and despite the potential betrayal of our patron, I was enjoying every moment of it. To enhance my enjoyment, I drove my heel downward until I felt a crack. A shiver of pleasure traveled from my heel up my spine. The wilder tried to scream, but it had no air left to do so. "Sir," Uinara, my second-in-command, said as she approached, "the crystal weapons cause more than bodily destruction." "I am aware of that," I said. To drive the statement home, I drove my heel into the ground. Pleasure enveloped me for the time it took for the Fae to die. Once it ebbed, I turned my attention to Uinara. "Are the elves wielding these weapons?" I asked. "No, sir," she replied. "Good, then we'll focus on them. Leave the wilder for the archers and make sure they're using iron heads. Any prisoners? No, sir. Our soldiers are not used to flesh, and all enemies that fell perished. The rest fled. Sir, about the weapons. Do you think that dash? You probably shouldn't ask that question out loud, I interrupted. Okay, do you think it's like this all over? No, I don't. But I don't see how the betrayal that you imagine could have happened. If the mortals knew of these weapons, they would be wielding them. Which begets the question, how could a demon bewilder a wilder? They know our lies and have eyes that can see through our tricks. They also know of every little leaf within their forests, so it couldn't be a matter of stealth, which leaves coincidence as the only explanation. A pretty shitty coincidence if you ask me, sir. I didn't. And was anger at the thought of betrayal why our soldiers left no survivors? I turned to glare at the freshly formed ranks. Something was off about them, though. A good portion were looking at Uinara and I through the corner of their eyes, staring straight ahead as they should. Others, though, were looking up with gaping jaws. "Oh fuck," Uinara shouted. I turned to see what caused her outburst and noted that her attention also seemed to be held by the sky. My gaze tracked her own, and I noticed that an oddly shaped cloud seemed to be moving in our direction. Before I could demand an explanation, though, I realized that the cloud had wings. "Oh, fuck," I muttered as flames began to form in the dragon's maw. Chapter 120. Nick Smith. Adventurer Level 11. Human American. "Fuck," I gasped, doubling over in exhaustion. "We can stop and take a break if you need to," Garen said, wiping bug guts off of his chest. "How much further until the boss?" "I don't know. Hey, Doston, how long's this part of the dungeon?" "Nobody fucking measures that, Garen," Doston scowled. "All we know is that the enemies here are bugs, the plants aren't safe to eat, and the boss is a fucking scorpion." My skin crawled once again at the mention of the boss. Scorpions had always been the subject of nightmares for me. Spiders and other bugs were fine, for the most part, but something about scorpions made my bones want to leave my body. I didn't know if it was their wasp-like stinger, their crab-like armor and claws, or their spider-like ability to stick to walls that freaked me out. Maybe it was some combination of the three. It could also just be their general shape, or the fact that some of them have deadly venom. Thankfully, I'd never run into a real one before. A couple of my friends had pranked me with some fake ones, but the area I grew up in was blessedly free of the tiny monsters. But when Doston and Yulk had initially described the boss of this portion of the dungeon, I immediately knew the horror that we would be facing. I'd even taught them the word for it. "I'll never get used to how disgusting these things are," Nifth said, pulling an arrow out of an extra-large fly. "Yeah, I think I'd rather have nearly any other job at this point," Kirea added, looking ill. I held my breath for a moment so that I could stop panting and stretched my tired muscles. Then I let out a deep sigh and looked at my sword. I imagined that it looked like a bunch of kids had stolen snacks and oil-based paints, then tried to make art out of the blade. There were greens, reds, browns, blues, and yellows, with several disgusting chunks of varying size. I swung the blade, hoping that some of the viscera would fly off, but only a few of the larger chunks left the blade and hit the floor with a disgusting splat. Trying not to retch, I pulled out a rag and began to wipe it down. "So are we taking that break or what?" Garen asked. "I can push a bit further," I replied. "You?" "Yeah, I guess." We'd already taken 2 rests in this part of the dungeon. The insect enemies weren't nearly as durable as the robots had been, but there were far more of them, and killing them had been exhausting work. To put it bluntly, the battles were faster, but much more tiring. It also didn't help that the mages had no area of effect attack spells that wouldn't turn the dungeon into a death trap. Doston had a spell that would create a powerfully acidic mist, but it would stick around without any wind to dissipate it. Lari had a spell that summoned a wall of flame that was a few feet thick, but that would fill the hall with heat, smoke, and carbon dioxide. Since we would have to march through the aftermath of either spell, we'd decided against using them. Instead, Doston and Yulk were using fireballs to handle the hives and swarms of smaller insects, while Garen, Nifth, and I handled the larger bugs. It wasn't a foolproof system, but Korea and Lari were on healing duty. They handled our injuries whenever a bug slipped through our offensive and took a bite out of one of us. As it turned out, Korea was really good at handling poisons, something Lari admitted that they had always struggled with. This had made me wonder how healing spells worked exactly, but I hadn't been given much time to fully think about it. "All right, are we ready to keep going and leave this mess behind?" I asked, sheathing my freshly cleaned blade. A couple of hesitant agreements later, we pushed on. This part of the dungeon looked a bit like the entrance portion, but with a lot more wear and tear. Most of the lights had stopped working, random roots poked out of the walls, portions of the walls and ceiling were covered in thick webbing, and there were abandoned hives and nests littered throughout the corridor. Not all of the hives, nests, and webs were abandoned, but it was very easy to tell which ones were active. The bugs were always moving around, skittering, flying, and making all sorts of noise. It was kind of a blessing that the fights were never a surprise. What wasn't a blessing were the bugs themselves. Some were insects, some were arachnids, and some had 10 or more legs. All sorts of nightmarish varieties that I'd never even imagined. I'd taken a few bites too. 10 had been very helpful in managing the pain, but I knew that I'd wince every time I heard a fly or mosquito from now on. The spider-type bugs were particularly off-putting. Most of them were somewhat translucent and kind of looked like ghosts. They would blend into their webs really well if it weren't for the fact that they were bigger than chihuahuas. The ones that weren't ghost-like were the size of Great Danes and barely darker than the shadows they liked to hide in. "I fucking hate this," I grumbled, finding another piece of bug on my armor. "Same," Garen sighed. "I'm glad we haven't run into this section before, or I'd have been tempted to hang up my hammer and become a farmer or something." "Which parts have you run into?" "We usually get goblins, hollows, harpies, or sauroids. The sauroids aren't so bad because there's only ever one of them." "Oh, right. Heard of those. Ambush predators with big mouths," I yawned. "What are hollows?" "Fucking horrifying," he shivered. "Empty shells of various things that try to turn you into an empty shell of yourself." "What?" "Well, imagine a suit of plate armor, right? Except it's moving around without someone wearing it. A hollow takes a thing, hollows it out, then wears it kind of like that." "That doesn't sound so scary." "Oh, it is. The armor thing might have been a bad example. They do it with skin mostly. They hollow out the skin, removing meat and bones, then wear it and go after another victim. Imagine a sack of skin, vaguely shaped like a person or animal, walking toward you as if nothing was wrong. It's creepy as fuck." "How do you fight them?" I asked, feeling a chill run up my spine. "Thankfully, they're not that tough. You crack open the shell and they fall out of it, and whatever they really are can't interact with non-hollow stuff." "They're conceptual beings," Doston said. "So long as their shell is what we would define as intact, they're able to inhabit it. So even a fairly small bit of damage can render the shell uninhabitable, so long as it creates a hole that you can imagine them slipping out of. And they're a really profitable enemy," Nith added, "so long as they're wearing armor and using weapons. Or wearing the skins of valuable monsters." "What's the boss of that section like?" I asked. "A heavily armored hollow with a great sword and the ability to cast magic," Yulk explained. "Nash and I fought it back when I still had hair." "Did you win?" Garen grinned. "Yes, actually. I managed to aggravate it enough for Nash to slip behind it and get a chop in at its rear joints, where the armor's straps are. Mother has its helmet in her room." "That helmet's worth some decent coin." "It is, but to her it has far more value as a sentimental piece." Yulk smiled. "It was the first time we fought a boss and won. She was very proud of us." "Oh shit," Nith sighed. "Now I miss my mum." "Hey Garen, you think after this run we can take some time off?" "I ain't the boss of you," Garen laughed. "And so long as you've got the coin to get there and back, I've got no complaints." "Huh. What? Come to think of it, you're right. You're not the boss of me." "So who is?" "I, for one, thought we were more of a democratic collective," Doston said. "What's that mean?" Garen asked. "We all vote and do whatever we vote yes to," Korean explained. "Oh, yeah, that's how we work," Garen laughed. "You guys usually make me do the talking, though." "So, I've been completely misunderstanding our dynamic this whole time?" Nith asked quietly. Nobody answered, instead falling into an awkward silence. For a while, only the sound of our boots echoed from the dungeon's walls. Then we heard more buzzing and skittering. Here we go again, I sighed, unsheathing my sword. Yep, Garen agreed, hefting his hammer and cracking his neck. Let's go. Garen and I took the lead while everyone else fell into position behind us. We slowly began to march forward, prepared to strike the moment that the bugs came into view. A large hive was on our left, and a thick web was on our right. A spider thing pushed its way out of the web and launched itself at my face, but I slashed it in half without even thinking. A fireball flew over my shoulder and slammed into the web, igniting it. I turned my attention to a giant wasp-like bug as Garen's hammer thudded into one of the spiders. I slashed the first wasp, but it was quickly followed by another. An arrow pierced the second wasp's abdomen, and it fell to the ground. Another fireball flew past us, igniting the hive. Both the wasps and the spiders' hiding spots were ablaze, and they weren't very happy about it. Another thud from Garen's hammer, another slash from my sword, another arrow from Nifth, and a variety of spells attacked the bugs. They kept coming, though. Pain flashed through me as fangs sank into my shoulder from a spider that had dropped from the ceiling. I grabbed one of its legs and flung it to the ground, then stomped on it. The pain in my shoulder had already started to fade by the time the wasp got me in the left arse cheek. "Fuck!" I shouted, spinning around and slashing it. The wasp was dead, but spinning had been a mistake. My left leg locked up and I felt extremely woozy. I slashed at another wasp, and Garen moved between me and the rest of the bugs. "Korea," he shouted. "On it," she replied. "Allow me," Larry said, then cast his area healing magic. I felt sensation return to my leg and watched a gash in Garen's back begin to knit. I stepped up next to him and began slashing at the bugs again. Some of them tried to ignore us, but they were killed by spells and arrows. A few minutes later, the last of the bastards died. "Okay, now I'm tired," Garen sighed. Nifth, Korea, and Dostan gave murmurs of agreement. Yulk and Lari didn't seem fazed. "Fine, let's find somewhere to rest," I said, wiping my sword with the dirty rag. "Somewhere with fewer bug guts." We continued on for a bit, leaving the mutilated bug corpses behind. We didn't get all that far before we noticed the walls getting wider. Part of me wanted to press on to the boss and just get it over with, but a glance at my comrades told me that we were too tired for that fight. "This is a good spot," Yulk said, with an air of casualness. "Yeah, pretty sure the boss is the next fight too," Garen agreed. We set up the barriers and I managed to eat despite the knot in my stomach. I couldn't get the image of giant pincers and a stinger out of my mind. I knew in my heart that it would be the next thing we faced. "So Nifth, you're going to go see your mom after this?" Dostan asked. "Yeah, I think so. My dad too, unless she's beat his head in with a pan," Nifth laughed. "I've also got a little brother, but he's probably moved out by now." "You don't write home?" "I would, but they can't read. Most of our village can't, and those that can charge a lot for their services." "Really? Must be a pretty remote village." "Yep, doesn't even have a real road, just a path, and a bumpy one at that." "Where did you learn to read?" Korea asked. "I lucked out. When I first got to Kirkener, an elven smith needed someone to make copies of receipts. I've always had an eye for detail, so when I wasn't practicing my archery, I was sitting in a dimly lit room and copying symbols from one paper to another. First word I learned was nail. Wow. My master taught me how to read and write as part of my training to be a healer." "Dostan and I had a tutor," Garen laughed. We all looked at him in shock except for Dostan, who sighed. "Where'd you get a tutor?" Nifth asked. "We grew up in Kirkener together," Dostan replied. "Both of our parents are somewhat wealthy. His are retired adventurers, mine are archaeologists." "Yep, I got my tutor the same place I got this big-ass hammer," Garen grinned. "My mummy." "Your mum used a hammer?" I asked. "No, she just bought it for me. My mum's a mage and my dad's a martial artist." "So you know martial arts too?" "A little, but my mum really didn't like my dad beating me up all the time. But my dad argued that I had the build for it, so they compromised and got me this hammer." "What about you guys? What do your parents do?" "My dad's a farmhand," Nifth answered. "Mom runs the house, with an iron fist, of course." "My mum's a jeweler and my dad's a miner," Korea said. The four adventurers turned to us expectantly. "My mother and father were both adventurers," Yulk said. I'd rather not reopen the subject of my parents if it's all the same to you, Larry added. What about you, Nick? Oh, well, I'm not actually sure what my parents did for a living, I replied hesitantly. My dad's job mostly involved doing paperwork, I think. My mum only worked part-time, but I don't know what she did. We never really talked about it. Is that common with humans? Yulk asked. I don't know. Maybe. There weren't very many of my friends who knew what their parents did for work either. Or if they did, they never brought it up. That's… Garen paused. Weird, I asked with a laugh. I guess so. I don't know. Maybe it's because most human jobs don't really pass from parent to child. We continued talking about human customs for a bit, then the conversation turned back to families. Kiria told us about how her parents fell in love when her dad sold her mom some gems he'd dug up, giving her a deal in exchange for a date. Nifth's parents met in a tavern, Doston's studied an ancient tomb together, and Garen's were members of the same party. By the time Yulk finished sharing his parents' story of love and loss, we were all ready to pass out. My sleep wasn't exactly restful, though. I had a nightmare about being covered in scorpions and woke up covered in sweat. Everyone else was still passed out, so I tried to go back to sleep and had another nightmare. This time it was about being chased down a really long hallway by a giant red scorpion that shot flames from its stinger. Nick, Yulk whispered, shaking me awake. You okay? Yeah, I replied as I sat up. Just a bad dream. You sure? Fucking hope so. Come on, let's go. We all got up, had another meal, then packed our makeshift camp and continued onward. The knowledge of what awaited us caused the pit in my stomach to sink further with every step. I thought I was playing it off pretty well until Garen piped up. Don't worry, Nick, he said. This is one of the easier bosses. Just don't get close enough for it to sting you. Yeah? And how are we supposed to do that while keeping it away from the others? I asked sarcastically. Ah, shit. Good point, he laughed. Gonna have to find someone who uses a shield when we get back. Well, in the meantime, I'll do my best to pull its attention. Maybe you can try to sever its tail. We'll see. Normal scorpions have a tough exoskeleton, which meant that the boss probably had actual armor plating or some shit. No chance of my sword making it through that. The walls continued to expand until we were obviously within the boss chamber. There were some glowing crystals, which provided some illumination. Our lights were brighter, but the crystals helped keep me calm. That is, until I came to the realization that the boss was not in view. Where is it? I asked with a higher pitch than normal. Up, Garen shouted. I looked to the ceiling and saw my worst fear realized. A scorpion, barely visible and much larger than I had imagined, was hanging above us like a spider. We quickly backed away as it dropped. The ground shook as it landed in front of us. Its thick black tail rose over its head at an arc, and the curved stinger pointed directly at me. Panic took hold of my mind as the monster snapped its claws and began crawling toward us at an unnervingly fast pace. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I raised a finger toward it. Telub Lietzak, I screamed, admittedly in a similar manner to a little girl. The spell fired, and the giant scorpion froze in place. Then it collapsed, a trail of blue liquid leaking from its face. We froze, trying to process what just happened. No fucking way, Garen said after a few moments. I think you killed it. Good, I replied coldly and cleared my throat. Could you check, though? Everyone laughed.